Development Management Committee meeting. I would like to make you all aware that this meeting is being live streamed by the Council's YouTube channel. Please ensure that any mobile phones are switched to silent. So welcome to those who are watching at home. I would also like to outline some housekeeping arrangements. If you wish to speak, please do indicate to myself. To enable your microphone, press the middle button that will turn green and the microphone will light up red at the top to indicate this has happened. Please press the middle button when you have finished speaking, as it is particularly important that all members use their microphone so that the audio can be picked up through the live stream. In the event of a fire alarm sounding in the middle of a meeting, please stand and follow the meeting administrator to the meeting evacuation point outside of the building. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Dew, Mockball, Tevlin and Brereton.
Thank you very much. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes for the last meeting. Do we all agree that these minutes are a correct record of our last meeting? Moving on to the second item on the agenda, which is members' interests. Are there any members that would like to declare an interest in relation to any items on the agenda this evening? Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. So item 4B and C, those items appeared at the St Neots Town Council Planning Committee when I was a member of that committee, and I took part in the debate, so I will leave the room for those items. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Slade.
Thank you. It's the same ones for B and C. I'm a ward member. I'm also chair planning at town.
Are there any other members that wish to declare an interest in any of these items? No, so we will move on to item number 3 on our agenda, which is our Development Management Section 106 agreement, to consider reports by the Planning Service Manager. And this item is Houghton and Witton and will be presented to us by our Senior Planning Officer, Laura Fisher.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Could I just, sorry, Jez, you've just come in, haven't you? Would you be able to join us up at the table? Thank you. There we go.
I'll move along with the spike anyway.
Thank you all. So this evening we are joined by Jez Tuttle from Cambridge County Council Highways Transport Assessment Team and Michelle Bolger, the Council's landscape consultant, who has joined us remotely. Now we have had late reps on this item, which I'll run through first. The late representations on behalf of Houghton and Witton Parish Council were received on Friday after the normal deadline for late representations, so only an oral update is made here. Members are asked to read the representations contained in the letter from Richard Buxton Solicitors, dated 18th of July 2025. If members have not had an opportunity to read these representations, time can be given during this meeting. Although the representations have been made late, they are before members and represent a material consideration. The representations seek to supplement previous objections by Houghton and Witton Parish Council and re-emphasise their key concern as to the quantum of development and the associated policy conflict from what the Parish Council considers to be the unnecessary overdevelopment of the site. Officers consider that this key concern has been appropriately dealt with in the officer report and policy SI1 has not been misinterpreted. The relevant section of the officer report is section 7 and paragraphs 7.13 to 7.70 in particular, which deal with the principle of development and landscape and visual matters. Members are invited to consider this section in the context of the officer report, which should be read as a whole. Policy SI1 provides for an allocation of approximately 400 homes. The supporting text to local plan section D states that a 10% tolerance either side of the approximate figure is considered to be reasonable. The proposal here would result in a number of units in that 10% tolerance. The supporting text of the local plan at D.8 goes on to say that all housing capacities should be design-led, and where a scheme proposes a number outside this variance, that should be justified through the design and access statement. Paragraph 7.25 of the officer report addresses each of the requirements of criteria A to I in policy SI1 in turn. For criterions A and B, the officer report explains why there is no detailed master plan nor design codes in the circumstances here. The design of the proposal is also dealt with at paragraphs 7.71 to 7.102 of the officer report, including its density, concluding that the design of this outline scheme is acceptable. As for Part G of the SI1, the officer report draws on the views of its external landscape and visual consultant, Ms. Bolger, to conclude that the proposal would maintain a sense of separation. As noted, Ms. Bolger is present at this meeting. The tension between policy Houghton and Witton Neighbourhood Plan 3 and policy SI1 referred to in the officer report at paragraph 7.29 refers broadly to the fact that the neighbourhood plan contained a policy aimed at anti-coalescence, whilst approximately 400 units were allocated to the west of St Ives in the more recent local plan. The officer report goes on to conclude that the proposal would be in accordance with policy SI1. Overall, although the late representations should be considered, they carry little weight, and officers do not consider that they change the overall planning balance and recommendations in the report. Can we just double check that everybody has had a chance to read these late representations around the table? Show of hands. That's great, thank you. Right, so this application is for up to 120 dwellings on land between Houghton Grange and the Howe, situated to the eastern edge within the parish of Houghton and Witton and to the west of the town of St Ives, located to the south of Houghton Road, the A1123. This plan shows the boundaries of the respective parishes in the immediate locality. The Sleep Meadows housing development, Garner Drive, is located to the north, whilst to the west is the residential Houghton Grange development phase 1, being built out by Shelbourne Estates. To the east is the Howe development and the Spires, which was land formerly part of the golf course. The site is accessed by a main pedestrian and vehicular access known as Edith Coote Drive directly from Houghton Road, opposite Garner Drive, which serves the existing phase 1. The Thicket footpath is located to the south of the site, beyond which is the River Great Ouse floodplain and the settlement of Hemmingford Abbots and Hemmingford Grey. The aerial image shows the extent of the adjacent Barrett Homes, the Howe and the Shelbourne Homes developments, which all form part of St Ives West. The site has a number of listed buildings nearby. The southwestern part of the site is located within the Houghton and Witton Conservation Area, and the St Ives and Hemmingfords Conservation Areas are located adjacent to the boundary of the site to the south and southeast. Part of the site to the south of Houghton Grange is a county wildlife site, and there is a public right-of-way in the southwest section of the site. There's a number of trees around the edge and a group within the centre that are subject to a tree preservation order. So this application has been made in outlined form with all matters reserved for the construction of up to 120 homes with public open space, landscaping, play areas, surface water attenuation, roads, car parking, pedestrian and cycle routes and associated works. The site forms part of St Ives West under the SI1 allocation within the local plan for approximately 400 homes. As noted, there's a 10% tolerance within the local plan in respect of residential capacity. 305 homes already have the benefit of planning approval, and the majority of these have already been delivered. The proposals result in a number of units within this tolerance and will complete the wider site allocation. The parameter plan here illustrates the background context and key elements of the development for approval. It includes key site constraints, which includes the water mains, foul water routes, and their associated easements. The existing Houghton Grange master plan with its consented suds pond, vehicular access, existing consented cycle and pedestrian routes, and retained trees. It illustrates a developable area of the site for residential use, alongside seeking an in-principle approval for a number of detailed elements that would inform future site layout, including open spaces and trees, pedestrian and cycle routes, as well as building heights and densities. As shown, the width of the gap between the edge of the proposed built development and the Howe access road varies in width. At the northern end, it is approximately 145 metres wide. It narrows to between 115 to 131 in the centre, and towards the southeast, it ranges from 136 to 165 metres wide. So the illustrative master plan is shown here, but this is purely for illustration how the development of the site could accommodate up to 120 dwellings. As noted within the officer report, the HDC Urban Design Officer has confirmed that the general layout could be made acceptable for reserved matters applications. Now, St Ives West allocation calls for approximately 23 hectares of on-site green space. The supporting text to the allocation sets out that the southern part of the allocation should comprise a substantial area of publicly accessible green space to reinforce the strategic green corridor along the river. This application will deliver 16.8 hectares of strategic green space, meeting that. In total, over 26 hectares of green space is provided across SI1, exceeding the policy requirements. The top right-hand plan on this slide shows an indicative illustration taken from the local plan of how the allocation could be achieved. As confirmed in the officer report, if permission is granted for development, the area of strategic greenland will be offered for transfer to the District Council. This piece of land provides the link between Berman Park, the Howe, and Thicket Wood, which is already in HDC control. This land is a significant benefit to the scheme and part of the strategic aim for the Council. Now, as set out in paragraph 3.9 of the report, there are a number of policies within the Houghton and Witton Neighbourhood Plan that are considered to have been superseded by the St Ives West site allocation. Members, as you're aware, we are in tilted balance, and this site is also allocated for development under allocation SI1. As set out in the report, policy SI1 is afforded significant weight in the determination of this planning application. Now, a number of objections have been received in relation to these proposals from both residents and parish and town councils. One of the key objections raised relates to landscaping concerns, and Houghton and Witton Parish Council have appointed their own landscape officer. Full copies of their reports received are within the officer report. Now, the council has therefore engaged an independent landscape consultant, Ms Bulger, who has provided advice, and full copies of these are also enclosed in the report. Ms Bulger has confirmed that the submitted LVA provides a fair assessment of the landscape and visual effects of the development, and on this basis, officers consider the submitted LVA is acceptable, and that the landscape and visual impacts of the proposed development are not considered to be significantly adverse, and that there is a clear separation between the developments at Houghton Grange and the spires, in accordance with the SI1 site allocation. A number of objections have also been received in relation to highways matters, in particular congestion along the A1123 Houghton Road. Trips generated from this site have been reviewed by the local Highway Authority Transport Assessment Team who also modelled the strategic road impacts of sites allocated in the local plan. The Highways DM team, along with the TA team at the county, have raised no objections to the proposals, subject to conditions. Objections have also been received in relation to flooding and drainage. The majority of the site is located within an area at the lowest risk of flooding, flood zone 1, and is therefore acceptable in principle. The LLFA have fully reviewed the proposals and confirmed there are no objections. A number of comments have also raised concerns with regard density. Based upon the number of dwellings shown on the illustrative master plan, the overall total, based upon 120 dwellings, would achieve an average density of 31.4 dwellings per hectare. A detailed exercise has been undertaken by the HDC Urban Design Officer, as set out in paragraph 7.82 to 7.88 of the Officer Report, which concludes that the proposal does not result in overdevelopment and does reflect an appropriate density that has regard to the wider character and adjacent developments. Okay, so St Ives West is a large-scale major development, and as such, the proposals are eligible to pay Section 106 contributions in addition to SIL. The range of contributions are set out in Section 7.320 of the report and shown on this slide. There will also be SIL receipts in the order of £1.1 million, and as Houghton and Witham Parish have an adopted neighbourhood plan, 25% of SIL receipts will go to the parish, which will be approximately £270,000. Now, following a query raised at Section 106 Advisory Committee, the thicket path to the south of the site is unregistered land, as confirmed by the Cambridgeshire County Council Definitive Maps Officer. In respect of the contribution towards primary school education, over £1.5 million has been requested by Cambridgeshire County Council. St Ives West in its entirety was forecast to generate the requirement of an additional 1 FE of primary education provision, of which individual developments have been expected to contribute towards the cost of this additional capacity based on the size of their scheme. Thorndown Primary School is the catchment school for the developments within St Ives West, as shown on this slide. I've annotated the application site in yellow. Now, an expansion project came forward in advance of funding from developer contributions, as agreed back in 2012, to allow the infrastructure to be in place to minimise the impact of the development. I'm just running through the photos. So these are some site photos taken along Houghton Road looking south and looking west. These are some views looking east and west along Houghton Road. We've got a view here from Sleep Meadows, the Garner Drive development, looking south with the highways infrastructure already in place. This is looking south and west as you enter Edith Coote Drive, and looking north from Edith Coote Drive towards Sleep Meadows. This is some of the existing frontage planting along Houghton Road. And a view from the corner of plot 12 at the Howe development, looking west across the application site. You can just see the water tower in the distance there. Now, this is from the southeast corner of the site, where a pedestrian link is shown on the parameter plan to connect into the thicket. These are views going into the Shelbourne development. And the view down what will be the Woodland Walk, secured under the Houghton Grange Phase 1 development. And these are views from within Houghton Grange Phase 1, where the parameter plan shows pedestrian links into the Woodland Walk as part of the current proposals. So determination of this application must be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. As the council is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, the presumption in favour of sustainable development is applied for decision taking in accordance with paragraph 11D and footnote 8 of the NPPF in relation to applications involving the provision of housing. This is generally referred to as the tilted balance. Whilst no 5-year housing land supply can be demonstrated, the local plan policies concerned with the supply and location of housing are considered to be out of date and can no longer be afforded full weight in the determination of applications. Allocation policy SI1 can, however, still be afforded significant weight. A balancing exercise should be carried out to determine whether any adverse impacts of granting permission will significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the NPPF 2024 taken as a whole. Now, in terms of the social dimension of sustainable development, the site appears to have no significant constraints and is deliverable. It would also increase the supply of housing, contributing up to 120 homes towards housing supply on an allocated site. The proposal will also result in the delivery of 40% affordable homes. In terms of the economic dimension, the proposal would contribute towards job creation during the construction phase and in the longer term through additional population. In terms of the environmental dimension, the proposal offers the potential for energy efficiency measures as well as the delivery of a net gain in biodiversity. The proposals will also deliver a significant extension to the publicly accessible Berman Park, the country park secured on the former golf course, to connect the site to St Ives and formalising the sense of the space and public access to the south. Financial contributions will be secured to support local infrastructure. There will be less than substantial harm to 2 conservation areas, a Grade 2 listed building and its curtilage listed gatehouse, with the harm in each case being at the lower end of the scale. Substantial harm has been identified to 1 non-designated heritage asset, some ridge and furrow, which must be taken into account when applying a balanced judgment. Although considerable importance and weight must be given to the statutory duties under the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act, applying Section 16 of the NPPF, the heritage harm here both individually and cumulatively will be outweighed by the public benefits as set out in the report. The visual and landscape impacts of the proposed development are not considered to be significantly adverse, and it is considered that a clear sense of separation is maintained between the developments at Houghton Grange and the Spires. The proposals are in accordance with policy SI1 of the adopted local plan, and applying paragraph 11 of the NPPF, the identified harm would not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the identified benefits when assessed against the NPPF taken as a whole. Therefore, having fully assessed all 3 objectives of sustainable development, it is considered the collective material benefits firmly outweigh the identified harm. Applying Section 38(6) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, the proposed development is in accordance with the development plan, and there are no material considerations which indicate that permission should be refused. It is therefore recommended that members delegate powers to approve the application in line with the recommendation, subject to conditions and the completion of a Section 106 agreement, as set out at Section 8 of the Officer Report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Councillor Richard Slade, who will report to us the S106 Advisory Committee's findings.
Yes, thank you. The advisory group considered the proposed development of up to 120 homes at Houghton Road, Houghton, and the associated Section 106 obligations. Members agreed the requested contributions have been properly explored with consultees and, where appropriate, necessary, and met the statutory test to make the development acceptable. The group supported the package of measures, including 40% affordable housing, contributions to early years and primary education, local health facilities, libraries, formal outdoor sports provision, and the substantial public open space that included with the scheme, which exceeds policy requirements. Members felt these obligations addressed the impacts of the development and would help it integrate effectively into the local community and infrastructure. The advisory group therefore supported the application and recommended the Section 106 package to the Development Management Committee.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to the section where we have our speakers. Our first speaker for this item is Houghton and Witton Parish Council, and they have Piers Riley Smith speaking on their behalf. Thank you for joining us this evening, and you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee.
Good evening, members. The Parish Council is not against any development, but they are against overdevelopment. And the overdevelopment of this site by a third, turning 88 homes to become 120, that's an extra 32 dwellings, is not a technical breach, nor a pedantic point. It creates a clear policy conflict which carries actual planning harm, and that requires refusal. Policy SI1, numerically in isolation, can be read as allowing up to 440 homes across the wider allocation, not this site, the wider allocation. But fundamentally, it is not a threshold under which any level of housing is okay. It is not interpreted in that binary fashion. It instead, what policy requires is a design-led approach to determine a number through a joined up master plan and design code across the whole allocation. That hasn't happened here previously. And what the past failure, which is recognised in the officer report, cannot justify is then overdeveloping the final part of this allocation to, as it were, make up the numbers. Why not? Well, it's not design-led, first of all, but critically, it leads to policy conflict with criterion G of SI1 and also the Neighbourhood Plan Policy 3, the anti-coalescence policy. It is an important heart of these policies that there is a separation between village and the town of St Ives. And this site forms a crucial part of that gap, which members you will know, having visited, is perceived currently as present but narrow. And the quite simple point is, the more you cram on, the less separation exists. And a third more level of housing has a material adverse impact on that separation. If I may, the officer report and the officer respectfully is wrong to suggest there's a tension. I just ask you to read paragraphs 15 and 17 of the Richard Buxton letter that addresses why there is no tension. The real world harm of the separation being degraded is then aggravated by the stark contrast from this application in terms of density. 32, we're told, for this application, against 16 in Houghton Grange Phase 1. The council's landscape expert is wrong, if I may say, to describe the site as already being more akin to St Ives. Policy doesn't reflect that, but treating it as such shows that already the damage is being done. And if this application is allowed, it will become part of St Ives contrary to policy. I've got 1 second less, so I'll say this. The application breaches policy SI1. It is a policy which you have to give significant weight to, and it means that the application is contrary to the development plan as a whole, and therefore you are directed to refuse it. If there are any questions, I've cantered through that with the 3 minutes, but I'll be very willing to answer them.
Thank you very much. So if we have any questions for this particular speaker, do any councillors have any questions? Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. Just on the point you opened with, and thank you for coming before us tonight, and well done for cramming that into 3 minutes. The point you opened with around the 400 figure, and you allowed that policy can be read as to interpret a 10% tolerance. Just to be clear in our minds, I think, and obviously your lawyer's letter discussed this as well. Is there dispute about the point of interpretation that a 10% threshold exists, and therefore 440 can be read within that tolerance in the proposal before us, and the objection is about not having arrived at the particular 440 homes with a master plan and in the planned way you've described, or is there an additional dispute about the additional 10% figure being relevant? Just conscious that you were quoting a figure
Yes.
of 88 and then 120. So just so we could be clear what you are and aren't saying about the 10% tolerance and how we should read the relevant policy, I think would be really helpful for us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Councillor. Yes, it is our case that the officers are currently misinterpreting the policy, and the misinterpretation is interpreting the 10% as allowing you carte blanche to go up to any number up to 440. I made that point of it, interpreting it as if it is, as it were, mechanistic, a binary yes or no. Up to 440, you're fine, beyond which that's when we need to look into whether you accord with the policy. That is an incorrect interpretation. What it misses, and members, if I may just give you the reference to it, is the officer report quotes partly from the supporting text, which is at the start of the chapter 9, quotes partly from D8, but misses the critical part of D8, because D8, paragraph D8 of the local plan goes, a 10% tolerance either side of the approximate figure set out is considered to be reasonable, full stop. All housing capacity should be design-led. So the point of interpretation is you don't start with the figure. You start with the design-led approach that is required across the allocation, reflected in the master plan and the design code requirement that was part of the policy. I appreciate it wasn't followed through, but that embeds the issue. It doesn't forgive it. So to I hope answer it in the clearest way possible, the 440 figure is a bit of a red herring, and it shouldn't be treated as it were, a threshold. The question should be, is this figure design-led? Has it spread up to a maximum of 440, but you can't go beyond that, across the allocation in a sustainable way? And we say it hasn't done that because you've not had this master planned approach, you've not had this design-led approach. This is the last allocation you've got, or last site in the allocation you've got, and the developer's cramming housing onto it as much as they can get. That's why we say we're not against development of this site. It's the overdevelopment. I hope I've pithily answered the question as best I can.
Councillor Wakeford, did you have a follow-up to that?
If I may, thank you. So just to be clear in the argument you've unpacked for us there, then, are you suggesting to us that design-led, I mean, that condition is clearly carrying a lot of weight in your interpretation. So your suggestion is that design-led should be interpreted to mean with a master plan and a set out, as opposed to a more generic phrase.
Yes, that's the way in which when you read, because case law tells us you need to read policy as a whole, supporting text can help inform what's in the policy box. In the policy box, you've got a requirement for a master plan and a design code. Why? Well, one reason is the supporting text tells us housing numbers should be design-led. So I think that's a very long way of saying yes, your question, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief on this one as well. It's just going back to your question, your mentioning of the it's not a technical breach. Am I relaying that in the fact that you're talking about the density factor, the density which is 31.4 in my calculations, or actually in here, and you're saying that's not the technical breach, it's just the lead breach. So in other words, 31.4 isn't a technical breach of density.
No, my fault for, as it were, using overly, as it were, barrister-like language. What I mean by that is sometimes, I'm sure you're very familiar with, objectors can raise a whole scattershot amount of points, and sometimes they technically breach a small part of the policy, but it doesn't really affect the planning merits overall and the material considerations and the weight to be given. What I meant by this is not a technical breach is, we're not just, as it were, relying on language and being able to show there's a conflict on the words of it. It reflects a material, actual conflict with the whole purpose of the policy. It goes to the heart of the policy. And that's why we focused in these 3 minutes on it as it were one of our big points. To use it in language, sometimes when you take challenges to the High Court, they can refuse to quash a decision if the decision would have been the same regardless. We're not in that sort of circumstance here in terms of this just being a point that won't make a difference to your conclusions. If we're right on this, then it means that the central important policy, the allocation policy, is not accorded with, it's conflicted with, and that renders the proposal contrary to the development plan as a whole. So it's my problem in the language I used. I apologise for that, but I hope I've explained what I mean by that.
Thank you very much. Are there any other councillors that have a question for this particular speaker? There are no other questions, so thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Chair, thank you very much for allowing me to go over my time limit by 10 seconds, and thank you members for hearing me out. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker on this particular item is Councillor Marcus Haywell from Hemmingford Abbots. Welcome, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak. Hemmingford Abbots Parish Council has significant concerns regarding this planning application. This development is not in accordance with HCC's local plan. The plan acknowledged development on the site, but not on the scale and size contained in this application. The resultant loss of openness between Houghton and Witton and St Ives, exacerbated by building close to, rather than away from, the A1123. We are particularly concerned about the increase in the number of residential units, should be 88, now to be 120, and the potential effects on the local infrastructure, and the high density of housing near the entrance from the 1123, which is significantly higher than in any neighbouring area. Further, we believe that the spirit of the planning system is being tested in this case. Is this planning application about creating an attractive and integrated space, design-led, or just maximising numbers and leaving a negative legacy for the community who have to live with the consequences of the overbuild? Finally, we are also concerned for the credibility and effectiveness of the local and neighbourhood plans. If this application is allowed to progress in its latest form, despite the clear breaches with local rules and consistent opposition from several neighbouring parishes, then a signal is being sent that local democracy is impotent and easily disregarded. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? There are no questions, so thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Our next speaker on this particular item is Councillor Nick Wells from St Ives Town Council. We can.
Well, as Chair of St Ives Town Council Planning Committee, the Town Council has recommended refusal of the application on the following grounds. Firstly, overdevelopment, and you'll pardon me if you've heard these figures before. The plan for 120 homes exceeds the recommended local plan allocation of 88 homes by 36%. This is significantly greater than the density of homes in Houghton Grange Phase 1 and even exceeds the density of homes in the St Ives Spires estate. It's interesting that the size and the shape of the area for development appears to substantially exceed that you see in the current version of the local plan. The actual shape of the development seems to have bulged out to the south and east. Well, this brings the increasing risk of coalescence between St Ives Town and the village of Houghton, impacting the character of both settlements. Secondly, impact on highways. The A1123 is already subject to heavy traffic and queuing in peak periods, and this development will add to the load proportionate to the number of houses allowed within the scheme. Bear in mind that there are no known proposals which would reduce the volume of traffic on the A1123. The proposals in the A141 and St Ives Improvement Study would not mitigate traffic flows between the St Ives, Houghton and Huntingdon. The St Ives element of this study does not relate to improvements to the road network, and so will have no effect on the road. St Ives Town Council therefore urges members of the committee to reject this application as it is proposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wells. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? Councillor Gorson.
Hello, Councillor Wells. You say there's a difference in the shape and size of the development from previous. Can you enlighten us as to what amount that would be, please?
So, I mean, there is a page actually which is in your agenda papers where you will see that the shape of the Houghton Grange Phase 2 development is a kind of well, it's obviously a trapezium, but you have a tilt to the north, outwards, expanding out to the north and expanding to the south eastern corner. It's difficult for me to be precise without actually displaying that particular page of the agenda papers, but you'll see that in the actual implementation that southerly and eastern corner seems to have bulged out more into the surrounding land, which is indicated on the current version of the local plan as being green space. I hope that's sufficiently clear, as I say, without looking at the actual original diagram. It's a bit hard to be clear on that.
Yeah, thank you. If I may come back. What I'll try and do is see if I can get clarification of the officer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll bring that to our planning officer in our questions for them. So we'll move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Councillor David Keane, and he is the ward member for Houghton and Witton. So welcome, welcome. And when you're ready, you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee.
Chair, members, officers, as said already, we don't disagree that development should happen on this site. The community and the parish council have all accepted that. The question before you is the scale and the harm that it will have on our pride of place. The current outline application proposes 120 dwellings. Officers have advised that this falls within the 10% flexibility in site allocation numbers. Those allocated sites are the Spires, the Howe, Houghton Grange Phase 1, and this one, Phase 2. But this interpretation deserves careful scrutiny, as the parish council has highlighted. The local plan has a 10% tolerance applied to the capacity for each spatial planning area. However, did this envisage putting the entire 10% toleration in one part of the allocation, thus leading to overdevelopment of a single, and most would say, the most sensitive site of all? Would anyone have seen that as being the intention? The allocation was intended to be design-led, coordinated through a master plan. While we have a sketched master plan submitted with this application, surely a comprehensive joined-up master plan across the entire allocation was required. Instead, we are presented with an application that concentrates all of the excess growth in the single, final, most sensitive site. And this is an important field. It sits closest to the settlement edge of Houghton within its visual and physical setting. Our local plan and the parish neighbourhood plan are both clear in seeking to protect the separation between St Ives and Houghton, and to guide development in a way that respects community identity and rural character. These policies are entirely consistent and are aimed at achieving the same goal, the preservation of the separation between Houghton and Witton and St Ives. This application represents a density increase from 16 dwellings per hectare in Phase 1 to over 31 in this phase, doubling the intensity in precisely the area where lower density would have expected. It's reasonable to expect less housing at the edge of the village, not more, surely. And perhaps most importantly, I believe there is no commercial need for delivering 120 houses. The scheme would be viable at 88 dwellings. So the question is not whether the development is acceptable, it is. The question is whether the additional 32 houses are supported by policy, needed for viability, or consistent with the settlement context. Of all three counts, based on the arguments presented, I believe the answer is no. Can I just sum up? This perspective is not solely that of the parish council and its advisors. It's also the clear outcome of extensive public consultation, reflects unanimous opinion of neighbouring town and parish councils and associated groups, plus our local MP. Given there is no support for this application, for the sake of local democracy and sound planning, I ask you to reject it.
and ask for a revised scheme.
Thank you very much, Councillor Keane. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? Councillor Sanderson.
Good evening, David. Good to be here this evening. I'm going to draw members' attention to paragraph 7.23 because it does, and I think you tried to sort of, David, as you spoke, Councillor Keane spoke, you did try and sort of argue against that, but 120 dwellings would still fall within the 10% tolerance referred to in the local plan, because it would then bring the allocation is 400, which I'm looking at page 194 of the local plan, and it's pretty clear. That's what it states. So it would then bring the total number across the allocation to 425, which is clearly less than the 440, and less than 10% tolerance on that. But you seem to be suggesting that we can't look at the local plan, the SI1, we just have to look at this application in isolation, which I don't think is realistic, if I may say so.
I think, as there are far more experienced people in this room, but as I understand it, Councillor, each of the sites within the allocation, I would say, would have 10%, but we're putting all of them in the last site. And as I said, it's the most sensitive and important site, I think, for the whole pride of place look for this development. So that's what I was trying to say.
Well, I expect everybody would say that. They would say their site is the most sensitive. It's a lovely part of our district, I agree. But so your argument is this should somehow be an exception to the local plan?
No, I'm not saying it should be an exception. What I'm saying is it's the edge of settlement. It's between St Ives and Houghton. St Ives and Houghton. You would expect there to be less density on the last bit of a settlement, not more density. By doing what you're doing, you're increasing the density. You're going from 16 in the phase 1 to almost 32 in phase 2. So how does that make an edge of settlement? So that's the point I'm trying to make.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you, and thanks for coming before us, Councillor Keane. And as you've drawn attention, you're here as a board representative as opposed to a planning expert. So with that in mind, I'd sort of seek to catch this fairly broadly. But would it be right to understand from your remarks that you feel that because there demonstrably wasn't a master plan here prior to any of the development of the linked sites, that it wouldn't be possible to bring forward a proposal in the circumstances we're in now? I'm just trying to understand how significant the point you're flagging about the lack of master plan is in your mind. And I'll ask the second question separately, I think, for simplicity, please, Chair.
Thank you.
Well, I think in hindsight, we all wish there was a more detailed master plan across the whole of the 4 allocated sites. I think, we talk a lot about pride of place all the time, and obviously the nature of our community, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's clear in the neighbourhood plan and in the local plan, we're looking to stop us getting an urban sprawl from one end of, Huntingdon to the other end of St Ives. Nobody wants that. And I think if we had a master plan, a design-led master plan, then that would have helped. On this particular one, I think we've said, the parish council has said, they're not against development on this site. They understand it. They were very supportive of phase 1. They worked very closely on that. And when you've got 16 houses, per hectare, I think the question here is just the size of the amount of houses trying to be put into a very small space while trying to maintain some kind of gap. And even that, is questionable. Some would say it's a meaningless gap, but trying to do the balance between the two, I think that's what's caused this issue. But if there was a revised plan that was probably closer to the 88 that was in the original, then I'm sure that would be more supportive from the parish council and the community.
Have you got a follow-up question, Councillor Wakeford?
Thank you. I do, if I may, and a more basic one. But Councillor Keane, you laboured particularly the views of local councils and democracy and reference democratic decision making. I just wonder if you agree that the planning process that we're making decisions in isn't, for better or ill, isn't a purely democratic one. Is about interpreting the rules as set out, and just wondered if you'd like to sort of clarify that.
I think tonight is a very good demonstration of interpretation of planning legislation, and obviously the importance of this body in that sense. I mean, it's very clear, isn't it, that we have officers who work very hard and advise us, but they have an interpretation of the legislation, and obviously there's other people here who have a slightly different interpretation. And unfortunately, all of you here have to decide on which one you're going to pick. So sorry, I leave that with you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Nish.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on something that you mentioned to Councillor Sanderson earlier, and it was a little bit fuzzed in my mind, which is not usually happens, to be honest. It was actually, you talked about the 4 phases, and you might want to remind the rest of the panel what the 4 phases were, but equally you talked about the total of those phases and how this one particularly impacts on the others through the numbers and the capacity of this last site, which we are looking at individually, because this is the one before us, as to how that you see as impacts and makes a difference compared to the others and the overall scheme, if that makes sense.
I'll try and answer the question. I'm a bit fuzzy too now. So yeah, just to reiterate, and it's very clear that we've got the St Ives side of this equation, which is the how, and then the spires. And then we've got the Houghton and Witton side of the equation, which is phase 1, which is already under development, and this one, which is directly in front of you. So we are talking about 2 village town. So that's the situation. 2 on one side of the village, 2 on the other side of the town. In between is a gap that's supposed to be meaningful. I think every time I drive down the A1123 and I go past that space, at the moment it's meaningful. It looks like I'm leaving Houghton and I'm going into St Ives. I believe this development, with the density of 32 in that space, that close to the road, with that size of gap, will mean you won't feel like you're leaving Houghton anymore and you're going into St Ives, or vice versa. You'll think you're just going through some kind of, sprawl from St Ives into the next area. I would say it's a bit like, and sorry for members at Hertford, it's that when you come into Huntingdon, have you got into a different village, or are you in just another part of Huntingdon? And we want to make, I think the local plan clearly states, we want to keep these things separate. We want to make people feel that they're in separate communities, because it's very important to the pride of place that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you very much. Are there any other councillors with questions of clarification for this particular speaker? No, there are not. So thank you very much for coming. We now have another ward member, Councillor Doug Dew, who I believe is on Zoom with us.
I normally would be, as you know, because I'm a member of the panel, but unfortunately I've had a medical procedure recently, so I'm prohibited from travelling and sitting in a meeting for a few hours. Anyway, I'll get down to the point on this. I mean, following on from what my ward colleague has said, and also the other speakers, my main issue on this has and always remains the fact that from the beginning of this development, the St Ives West, as it's called, which actually has always included a large part of Houghton and Witton, there's always been the desire to keep a substantial gap. The gap between the 2 communities needs to remain, to actually give the impression, as Councillor Keane has already said, you are leaving one community and going to another. If you look at the figures that we were given earlier about the various gaps between it, at the narrowest point, which is the pinch point, it's 115 metres. That is, to put it in context that you and I and others can think of, that is the length of a football pitch. you know, if you're travelling in a community and there's a football pitch, you don't suddenly feel you've left one community and joined another. So the gap is very, very tight there, and always has been. My desire on the site has always been to follow the non-coalescence wording, and I actually think that what's proposed here actually closes that gap substantially. Following on from that, with the fact that we are trying to play catch up, what we're trying to do with these 4 sites is, and I accept the 10% tolerance, but what we're trying to do is pick up on the underperformance of the others in the 10% and lumber it all into this one site, which, as other people have already said, does actually mean that we're sitting here now with something that looks very much the edge of an urban sprawl rather than the start of a village, which is what we were really trying to achieve with this. I don't think that the current plan with 120 houses or so is workable to achieve what we were looking for in the first place, both as a local community and as a council when we brought our plans together. And I appreciate the fact that, you know, being a member of the panel, that, you know, we've got an option here. One option we can't have is say, oh, we accept it, but it's got to be 88 houses. It's either acceptable 120 or it's not. And I would urge members to look at it and say, well, within our policies, there are various bits and pieces taken into account. But the 120 is definitely picking up the sins of the other sites in their lack of the 10% and catching up. So I'll leave it there for now, because I think I've made it quite clear where we are. You know, anti-coalescence, we're not leaving a substantial gap. I would suggest there's no gap at all if you leave the width of a football field. And also the fact that we're trying to pick up all the extra houses on one patch at the end of the day. Quite happy to take questions, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Are there any questions of clarification for Councillor Dew? No, there are no questions. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, everybody.
I will move on to our next speaker, which is Chris Butterworth. Welcome. And when you're ready, if you just press the middle button and the light will go red at the top of your microphone, and you have 3 minutes in which to speak.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Butterworth. I've lived in Houghton 25 years, and I'm here on behalf of concerned residents. We're not NIMBYs, as you hear, since the local plan was approved. We've never opposed the principle of housing development on this site. And we've supported the parish council through the planning process to ensure they represent us and our views, that they follow the planning policies, and most notably this anti-coalescence policy that protects the different identities of rural village and the town of St. Ives, and to ensure that this development complements phase 1, which was excellently done. As local residents, we've supported the parish council's appointment of professional advisors, landscape assessors, architects, lawyers, barristers, and supported the associated expenditure as well. We were very disappointed and shocked by the tone and the content of the officer's report recommending approval of this application. This report appears to undermine our neighbourhood plan and suggests that it is now suddenly, somehow, in conflict with the local plan. This is an assertion that's never been put forward before in the 2+ years since this planning application was submitted, nor in the 6 years since the plan's own creation. The 2 plans were created in synchronicity with full knowledge of each other, in harmony, and not in conflict. And this sudden new change of view seems to us as an irrational and inaccurate connivance that this governing committee should not tolerate. It appears as a desperate attempt to ignore what is good and agreed policy, clearly stated. Our neighbourhood plan was endorsed by 2 national inspectors in a rigorous inspection process. It's part of the development framework alongside the local plan. The policies of both documents reference the importance of the gap. They are not there to drive coalescence by pushing the envelope on this sensitive last remaining parcel. Each plan defines carefully the very same location of the gap, in words, and in the case of the local plan by an illustration as well. We simply ask for this to be followed more precisely and not ignored. For over 10 years, this has been a story of David and Goliath, with the District Council losing an entirely unnecessary yet famous and expensive case in the High Court. This preceded our current neighbourhood plan, which was agreed through thorough representation. We sincerely hope we will not have any more unnecessary, expensive, and potentially also famous wastes of taxpayers' money defending the agreed local plans against such a desperate, unnecessary attempt to undermine them. This should not be the outcome while HTC exists as an entity and the Development Management Committee still allows you
Just one.
as councillors, half a sentence, that's all, if that's all right.
Yes, that's fine.
While the HTC still exists as an entity and the Development Management Committee still allows you as councillors to have a final say on contested planning applications, then you have the power and responsibility to protect this village and market town as we know them. I plead with you to make this decision yours and your committee's lasting legacy and exercise your independent judgment by recommending a review.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of clarification for this particular speaker? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you very much for coming to see us. What is your view on tilted balance? Because you didn't mention it at all in your remarks. You were sort of suggesting that somehow we're just disregarding the neighbourhood plan, which I don't think we are in this case. Do you not think that that is a factor in determining this application? Because that was in the officer's report, and is it paragraph 11D of the NPPF clearly outlines why that is so significant?
Well, I'm just here as a citizen, a parishioner, customer. I'm not an expert or a service provider, but yes, it's definitely a factor, isn't it? The local plan must be considered. There is an illustration and there were good words which describe what this gap is. They appear in the local plan and in the neighbourhood plan. And it seems that that is very much changed in comparison to this application. So therefore, those bits are somewhat being ignored.
I didn't quite hear your last. Could you just speak a bit closer to the mic? Thank you. I didn't hear your last one.
So we have an illustration in the local plan, and we have good words in the local plan and in the other plan. They both fit together. It draws the outline of this proposed development. And that's very different in the application. The application has changed that outline. So it seems that that drawing is being ignored.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors that have a question for this particular speaker? No, there are no other questions. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. I will move on to the last speaker for this particular application, and that is Jim Strike, who is the agent. Welcome. And you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. If you just press the middle button.
Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of this application. I'm Jim Strike from ACOM, planning agent for Homes England, the government's housing and regeneration agency. Homes England is an arm's length body with a remit to increase housing delivery. They work with partners across the country to increase the delivery of new homes where they're needed, in accordance with adopted local planning policy. Homes England acquired Houghton Grange to deliver new homes to meet pressing local need, including the need for affordable properties. The Phase 2 application is a natural progression of the successful Phase 1, where Shelbourne Estates are building 100 new homes, of which over 70 are completed. The proposals before the committee today are design-led. The proposals strike a balance between making efficient use of land to deliver high-quality new homes while sensitively responding to the character of the site and its setting. As well as the 120 homes, of which 48 will be affordable, over 17 hectares of newly accessible public green space will be provided, offering substantial recreational opportunities for local people and considerable scope for wildlife enhancements along the River Great Ouse Valley. Attractive and convenient off-road, pedestrian and cycle connections will be provided, linking to existing communities and wider networks. A substantial area of green space will be retained on the eastern side of the site, providing a meaningful break between neighbouring developments. The housing area is just under 4 hectares, less than a fifth of the site area. Housing densities will average 31 dwellings per hectare, but no more than 23 dwellings per hectare closest to Houghton Road. The location and extent of the new housing area has been carefully designed to minimise the townscape and landscape impact, taking account of stakeholder comments. The proposals accord with the development plan and take account of the relevant policies of the local plan, neighbourhood plan and supplementary planning policy. Specifically, the proposals comply with Strategic Allocation SI1 St Ives West. Design quality is embedded in everything that Homes England does. The agency uses building leases to ensure high standards of design are actually delivered, as seen on Houghton Grange Phase 1. This proposal represents responsible, design-led and plan-led development that meets policy requirements and delivers lasting benefits for existing communities and future residents. I respectfully ask the committee to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any councillors that have any questions? Councillor Wakeford, then Councillor Niche.
If you'll forgive me again, Chair, and if the mic holds up, I have two questions. Thank you for coming before us. My first question is really where you ended, if I may. You've described this as a design-led development. You'll have heard in discussion, I think, that there's been suggestion that we shouldn't see this as being design-led in the language in our policies as a result of the lack of original master plan behind it. I just wonder if you'd like to comment for us on the extent to which you feel we should or shouldn't correctly see this as a design-led application, and sort of what that means to you, and what you think we should hear from you on that.
Yeah. So the company I work for is a master planning company. So we take design very seriously in everything that we do, and Homes England, as our client, does as well, as I've touched on. So I think the important point to make is that this isn't just a numbers game. What we've tried to do is come up with a development scheme here which makes efficient use of land, delivering the number of homes which is desperately needed locally, but in a way which mitigates any of the potential harm that there might be in terms of landscape impact, townscape impact, keeping a degree of separation between Houghton Grange and the spires, which is a specific requirement of the allocation. And the scheme has evolved over a considerable period of time, where we've listened to stakeholders, we've responded to those comments where we can, and come up with a scheme which has been sort of developed and finessed over a number of iterations. I think we're now on version 9 of the parameter plan, which reflects the fact that the scheme has evolved and responded to issues that have been raised. And in that sense, I certainly think it is a design-led scheme, sensitively trying to accommodate an appropriate number of homes to meet that very pressing local need.
And you have a follow-up question, Councillor Wakeford?
I do. Thank you for that. My second question was on a point you referenced in passing in your first answer as well. It's about the gap, the separation between the two communities, which you'll know various policies have sought to retain, and you've obviously heard this evening, which I suspect you didn't need to, but you heard this evening again that is felt strongly by local residents as well. I just wonder if you'd like to comment for us on the extent to which you feel that there might be harm to that loss of separation, but the harm might be unavoidable or necessary or reasonable, or to what extent is it your case to us that that there isn't a harm in the undermining of the separation, and that we shouldn't see that there is? So, is there a harm and there's defence for it, or isn't there? Or any comments you'd like to make about the separation, please?
I think that the degree of separation that we have now with the gap on the eastern side of the site is certainly adequate in terms of dealing with that point of anti-coalescence. And we've specifically made that gap wider as you'll appreciate, to the north and south. And to the north, it's particularly important, obviously, in terms of the relationship with Houghton Road, which is where quite a lot of that perception of coalescence will be experienced by people passing up and down Houghton Road. So I think that we have addressed successfully that issue of dealing with anti-coalescence.
Thank you very much. Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back a couple of things because you've got the benefit in some aspect of we're looking at an outline planning application, so we don't have the details of what's where and when, except just a rough guide, should we say. So there's a little bit of it there. It's just when you mention it's not a numbers game, I'm just trying to ascertain from a resident's perspective, because that's the thing that sort of they've been utilising, is that we seem to have a density factor of about just under 32, it's 31.4. But you're saying you're adjusting that throughout, so it doesn't look so dense at the front. And of course, we can't see that because it's just an outline planning application. So I wondered if you could give any indications, I suppose, as to how you could alleviate those concerns that you've heard from some of the speakers tonight already. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's worth explaining that whilst it's an outline planning application, the parameter plan does fix a number of important elements of the scheme. So absolutely. So that would be, for instance, the area of that housing development area, the edge of that, there's no room for that to move. So effectively, that is defining where the housing development will happen. And similarly, one of the iterations of the parameter plan was to introduce that lower density closest to Houghton Road. So that's fixed. So the area effectively to the north of the access road, and I think to the east as well, it's shown on the parameter plan that the housing densities in that area cannot be more than 23 dwellings per hectare. So there is a lower density element to the scheme, and that's to try and ensure that this scheme has a sort of village feel in its relationship with Houghton Road. And similarly, there are areas of substantive planting between the housing area and Houghton Road that again are fixed on the parameter plan. So they have to happen in those locations. So whilst it's an outline application, there are important safeguards in terms of what we're seeking planning permission for to ensure that a housing developer can't come along and treat it as carte blanche. It's, there are those important fixes that capture important elements of the scheme.
Do you have a follow-up question?
And just briefly to follow up, because again, it's a concern that was raised, and in their, or my interpretation of their words, while we ended up cramming in, and that's my interpretation of what they've been saying, the additional housing into this smaller end plot.
I think it's fair to say that the housing densities are absolutely reasonable, and I think the analysis that the officers have done looking at the housing densities of other schemes around bear that out. Part of the reason that the density is what it is because we've tried to ensure that a significant areas of open space are kept as open space. So effectively, what we've done is to ensure that the housing development is delivered effectively and efficiently in a small part of the site. So effectively, the less than 4 hectares is the area where the housing is going, ensuring that 4/5 of the rest of the site is green space. So, I think, again, it's one of those elements that have been iterated over a period of time to come up with that solution. But that's, all part of the sort of design-led approach to achieve effectively an optimal outcome in terms of housing delivery and the quality of the scheme, and picking up those important points like anti-coalescence.
Thank you very much. Are there any other councillors? Councillor Slade.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of... There we are. Okay. A couple of questions. This might seem like an odd one, but why this site? It just seems like a bit of an... There's a lot of obstacles in the way. It's very close to kind of key green and blue spaces. There are other places that would be easier to build on.
I'd need to refer to Homes England for the rationale of acquiring the site. But I mean, that is what Homes England do. They acquire surplus public sector land, I think it was in this case, with a view to repurposing it to deliver homes that are desperately, urgently required. And they acquired Houghton Grange, obviously, as part of that exercise. Phase one benefited from an outline planning permission to begin with, so that was brought forward relatively quickly. But the intention always was that there would be a phase two, which would build on the phase one. And I have to say, the very successful phase one, as I understand it. It's a sustainable location. It's a good place for new housing. And I think we've come up with a good proposal, which we would ask the committee to approve.
Okay, thank you. And when you talk about good, you're talking about in terms of they sell well because they're close to rivers and lots of green spaces rather than in farmland or low grade.
No. I just mean it's a good place for housing development. It's a sustainable location. There's public transport, there's walking and cycling connections and so on. And it's obviously a wonderful landscape setting. And it's a sensible location to try and deliver homes to meet that very pressing local need.
Okay, thank you. And then second question, and you may not know the answer to this one. I might have to refer to officers. There's a couple of restricted covenants on that land. I'm just curious what they are.
I'm not familiar with that restricted covenants. I know there are a number of easements associated with utilities infrastructure which crosses the site, but
okay, I'll let officers.
Maybe we'll take that questions in the officers section. Thank you. Are there any other questions for this particular speaker? There are no other questions, so thank you very much for joining us this evening. So now we move on to questions of clarification for our planning officer. So Councillor Gorson.
I think this is just for comment. Councillor Wells mentioned about the shape and size differential. I'd just like to hear a comment from the officer as to, was there a shape and size differential from what we see now? Thank you.
I'll just check in terms of the local plan, illustrative in the local plan.
Sorry, I didn't quite gather whether it was from the local plan, but certainly he was indicating on the north of the site there was more of a bulge on this now to what it was originally.
And I think that comes, and it was put up in the presentation earlier, and we can get it back up there. There is an indicative form of development, a sketch within the local plan as part of policy SI1, and that recognises, it says in here on paragraph 11.4 of the local plan, recognises both the opportunities and sensitivities of the site. The indicative illustration summarises detailed urban design work setting out how development of the area could take place. So it's one form of development that could take place. It is a slightly different shape. It is similar, though. It is showing some development in that area.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Butler.
Thanks, Chair. Can you just remind me we've heard a lot about the density. What's the standard, or what can you go up to on the is it 40, 45 an hectare?
Sorry, through you, Chair. I mean, the density itself, I mean, it's, without wishing to dodge it too much, it's not dodging at all. It's each application's own merits. So in this particular case, as has been flagged up on the last speaker, the indicative plan, or the parameters plan, does show a variety of density across the site. Yes, in a more urban area, that density would be significantly higher, but in a rural area, that has to be assessed on the surrounding densities, the phase one, for example, and the area as a whole. It is felt by officers that this proposed density on this parameters plan does suit that particular area. But to answer your question, Councillor, you can go higher than what's been proposed, but that would be in a different format, different area, such as more of an urban area rather than a rural area such as this nature.
Thank you. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. One of the points of policy interpretation that came up in a couple of contributions we've heard this evening is around the existence or otherwise of conflict between the neighbourhood plan and between the local plan in terms of the objective of a boundary between the two areas of settlement. Appreciate there's a reference in the report, which I don't have in front of me to give you forgive me, the paragraph reference. But there's reference in the report. I think you may have made reference to this in the additional remarks at the beginning in light of the legal letter, but I just wonder if officers would like to comment on the significance or otherwise of any conflict there to the coherence of the argument that's being recommended to us by officers. I mean, sort of put crudely, if we didn't see there was necessarily a conflict, what does or doesn't that unpick in the advice that you've given us? Thank you.
Thank you. Just going back to when I started as part of the late reps, so we did the tension between the policy Houghton Witten Neighbourhood Plan 3 and policy SI1 referred to in the officer report at paragraph 7.29. That refers broadly to the fact that the neighbourhood plan contained a policy aimed at anti-coalescence, whilst approximately 400 units were allocated to the west of St Ives in the more recent local plan that takes precedence over the neighbourhood plan.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. Just coming back to paragraph 7.23 in the report. And I think it was the first speaker whose name escapes me from the parish council seemed to suggest that this didn't apply. And Councillor Keane in his remarks was saying, well, yes, he's not saying that the local plan isn't relevant, but it shouldn't apply to this particular application in terms of this 10% tolerance. But it is pretty clear here that it would be 425 homes in approximately 400 home allocation. So that would be obviously less than 440. So I just wondered if we could get clarification on that point. I don't know if you're planning to ask our transport consultant, Jez, over there for to answer any questions, but I just wanted to put about the impact on the 1123 because the county obviously saying that there won't be an impact here on the highway. But I believe that, I think it's the MOVA it's called, I'm not sure what that actually stands for, but that's connected to the traffic lights, isn't it, and making sure they're synced correctly so we don't have the sort of traffic jams that I know local residents will be concerned about. So I wonder if we get clarification on those 2 points, please.
So just in terms of the sort of the tolerance in this 10%, so this has been applied across the allocation. There's nothing in the allocation or the introductory text to section D that specifies how any numbers within the tolerance above that number set out in the allocation are distributed. So our position is that there's no policy basis for contending they can't all be in one section. And the acceptability or otherwise of the 10% tolerance is based on whether or not the design is acceptable. Obviously, the officer report covers that the admin design officer is content with the proposals. You got anything to add, Jez?
Good evening, and through the chair, the transport assessment team and the highways development management team had some quite considerable amount of discussions about this site. Some modelling was undertaken to look at the junction to see whether it would work with the additional traffic. So, and the conclusion was, whilst there will be an impact, it wouldn't actually take the junction over its actual theoretical capacity, although it meant that it would be above its it wouldn't take its actual capacity, but it would be above its theoretical capacity at times during the peak hours. But the question is whether we could raise an objection, given that it would only be for short periods of time during the peak hours. And the answer was no, we didn't feel we could because of the minimal impact. What we thought would be a good idea as well would be to put the mover system on the junction, which doesn't exist at the moment. I can go into detail about the move, but essentially what it does is it allocates green time to where it's needed rather than just having standard timings. So, people are waiting while there's a red signal, sort of, green somewhere else and no one's coming. It's an intelligent system that reallocates the green time. And what that will do is will actually bring the impact down to, what we feel to be an acceptable level. And we've asked for a condition that prior to the occupation of any dwellings, that mover system is put in.
Thank you very much. Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair, for indulging in me again. I've got a couple. Some of them are quite simple. You'll be pleased to know. First of all, it says, in our pack up to 120, yet in 7.376 it says 120. Probably just a technical issue. The next one is if you could bring up, if possible, we talked about the gap, not on the underground, but in actually the real gap. And it talks about the difference in gaps. And I know one of them is 145 because it mentions in a paragraph. I just wondered what the narrowness of the gap was and where the other part of it was. So that's another question. I've got a couple more if I can, or shall I wait for those to be answered?
We'll just find these and do them one at a time if that's okay. I'm going to get confused. Thank you. I will just clarify, but this application is for up to 120. So yes, and that's in what the application description. Here we go. So this is shown on the parameter plan, and on these, the dimensions are shown on the plan. So we don't have one that goes all the way across the front in terms of the green adjacent Houghton Road there, but there is existing landscaping along there at the moment. And then it goes to 145 metres, 115, 130.9. And then in the corner there with the Howe development, 165.6 and 136 metres. So we had these dimensions added on this plan just to make it very clear on this parameter plan what this gap would actually entail.
I have a follow-up question, Councillor Niche.
Yeah, thank you. I'm back on. Yeah, thank you. That was very useful. I did remember some of them, but not all of them. My additional one is the one that I think is to the crux of some of the matters on this one, is on density. Not my density, but the density of housing. And it talks about in 7.82 about Houghton with Parish Council on the residents, blah, 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 on the locality, but their concerns are on density. And you've put in here, however, also officers consider that the proposed density of development is in line with standard densities in common with market town developments. I wonder why we're using market town developments when it's actually more of a rural development, is one. Because the next bit then goes on to the different densities and why are the edge of density in one of the many pages that you've written, so in this well-documented area here. It talks about 25 on the edge of developments, which is where it might confuse myself with some of the other plans you've seen that I might not have read completely in depth on this one. And the last thing is when they talk about a flawed 10% allocation, I just wondered the view from officers on the fact that if we look at this in isolation, we're talking about an original plan of 88 and now it's 120. When they're talking about the overall, all the phases were 440, therefore the 10% wouldn't have been up to that 10% figure, which is 440, I think, and it doesn't come to that, if that makes sense. It almost did to myself when I thought about it.
Let me go through. So I think the reference to 25 dwellings per hectare, that's picked up on some of the comments that were received from Houghton Witham Parish Council in terms of the local plan that's going through at the moment, in that they were looking at 25 dwellings per hectare on edges of villages. I think in edges of like market towns, it's 35. So this is why we've got these two different numbers in there making reference to different things. Sorry, can you just repeat the last bit of the question? Sorry.
Was that reference to flawed 10% allocation? I wrote most of it down, but I can't read my own writing. Whether it counted for the whole of the site, and whether because we're looking at it as an individual aspect. They're talking about the argument is that we're cramming from what was originally going to be 88 now to 120, but that's because it's taking all the additional 10% from all the four phases and ploughing it into one. That seemed to be the gist that they seem to be getting at the moment on the amount of density within that particular area.
Okay, so there's nothing within the local plan, there's no policy basis rather for contending you can't have, in terms of this 10% just in this final section. Obviously there's been, in terms of the plan history of this wider St Ives West set out in the officer report, the permissions were historic by the time the local plan was adopted. The developments had already come forward or had been given planning permission. So this is just the last sort of piece in the puzzle as such. And so, yeah, we've applied the 10% across the allocation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question might be quite similar to Councillor Nish's, and if I put it in my own words, I may possibly elicit a different answer or not. I'm not sure. So first of all, just on the up to 120, and the whole design-led approach questions around on that topic, essentially, if this is approved this evening, are we acknowledging that the site can accommodate 120 homes, or is it really up to 120 depending on further designs coming forward? But is there a presumption of 120, or is that really yet to be tested? I've got another further question if that's okay.
So that is yet to be tested. We would have to look at this at reserve matters stage in terms of all the reserve matters that would come through. So yeah, it's up to 120. That will be assessed later. It is, yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So essentially it's saying it's possible, but we haven't yet established it as fact. Okay. And then perhaps my other questions are slightly carry less weight. Having established that. But I guess the 400 homes across the wider site, like there are a number of contributing factors to that. So one of them will be access and vehicle movements. And my understanding would be that you can transfer some allocations across different parts of that wider site and still have the same impact on the main road. However, in terms of density of housing, clearly that has a more immediate effect on the immediate area. Can you give us any insight on the relationship of those different contributing factors in terms of the establishment of a 400, and it might not be something we have here today. And then a similar, related question, so I'll roll it in together if that's okay. The agent talked about the 23 dwellings per hectare close to the road that's in the parameter plan. Apologies, maybe I should know this, but is the parameter plan actually part of this application, and is it binding if this goes ahead today?
Let me just pick that up then in terms of the density. So across St Ives West, there's different constraints across St Ives West. Up on the spires, there are a lot of TPO trees, the same at the Howe. At Houghton Grange Phase 1, there is a lower density, but that's also due to TPO trees and landscape setting, and we've got listed buildings up there as well. Now, in terms of density on the plan that is up here now, the parameter plan. So if this application is approved, this would be the approved plan, which does show some hatching on here. Don't know whether it's not going to show it. So there is some hatching, as the agent said, in terms of this lower density along the frontage of Houghton Road and then wrapping round on the east, so the edges of the development. This would be the approved plan. It is approved. The illustrative master plan is just how it could be developed, but that would be saved for a reserve matters stage.
Councillor Wakeford, did you have a question?
I did. I had a couple, Chair, further, if I may. So one was going to be a point, I think, between Councillor Nish and Councillor Pitt we've picked up, but just for avoidance of doubt, the 400 homes figure across the wider allocation, the officer's advice to us is there is not a policy basis for saying, let's look at a proportion of that, and we expected 88 houses, therefore we can apply, let's say, 10% on top of 88 and get to, 96 and part of a house. I think we're clear in being advised there is no policy basis for saying that that's what it means, but I'm seeing it shaking. So that's helpful. Was there anything further you wish to say on that? No,
nothing.
No, absolutely fine. On my earlier question about tension between the local and the neighbourhood plan, forgive me, I just wonder if we could come back to that. Could I just push officers on the extent to which it matters that there's a tension for the coherence of the argument that we've got before us? I'm anticipating that might be a significant point for us later, just to make sure we've taken opportunity of taking maximum input from you.
I don't know if it would be a benefit for everybody in the room just to read out paragraph 7.29 of the report. This talks about the tension between the neighbourhood plan's aim of preventing coalescence and the fact that approximately 400 homes were allocated. And that the neighbourhood plan accepts that the local plan, which was emerging at the time of the neighbourhood plan was written, would make the decision about where exactly they would be located. This site subsequently became part of the allocated site SI1 in the local plan. And then, as noted, the tilted balance is engaged. Policy neighbourhood plan 1 is given no weight, and neighbourhood plan 3 is given significantly reduced weight in the determination of this application. So that's where we've sort of recognised that there was this tension, but then we have site allocation, St Ives 1 as allocated.
Yes, so if I may, I suppose my question is, were we to take the reasoning presented to us by some of the representatives we heard from this evening, that actually you can read the neighbourhood plan and the local plan as compatible on these points, so therefore were we not to see that Houghton and Witton neighbourhood plan 1 has no weight to it at all? If we saw that had a bit of weight to it, to what extent would that impact or not the I suppose the logic of what's being put to us? And I will leave it. Forgive me if I'm pushing a point you don't feel able to comment on further.
If I could just refer you to paragraph 3.9 of the report in terms of tilted balance being engaged, and the policy, Houghton Witton Neighbourhood Plan Policy 1 is given no weight as it's been superseded by the site allocation SI1, and policy 3 is given significantly reduced weight, noting the conflicts between the policy and allocation SI1.
Okay, may I ask a final question, Chair?
Yes,
a different point. So again, a number of speakers have touched on the clarification in D8. I think Councillor Sanderson's question earlier pertained to this as well in our local plan. So the final two sentences of that are explaining the tolerance on the 400 figure. It says a 10% tolerance either side of the approximate figure set out is considered to be reasonable. And that's obviously been quoted in the report. Speaker on behalf of the parish council put, to my understanding, very considerable weight on the significance of the following words in the final sentence: all housing capacities should be design-led. And then it goes on to say how you might justify going beyond the 10% tolerance. I just wonder if officers would like to comment on how much we can and can't defensively read into that phrase of design-led. I think that it was being put to us that really we should take design-led to mean there should have been a master plan already, and the absence of a master plan already means it sort of is impossible for it to be design-led. Argument was made in response to my question to the parish council representative that the fact that SI 1 talks about having a master plan in it means that this is even more strongly understandable as meaning a master plan. I think that's contrary to the advice we've got from officers. I just wonder if you'd like to unpack what design-led sort of does and doesn't mean, and or how narrow a term it is in terms of the existence of a master plan or not.
So I guess it is design-led, and the current proposal we've got does link in with the adjacent developments in terms of path connections, and we've got the other developments either side. So I would say it is design-led. I know we haven't had a master plan for the reasons we've gone over. Anything else to add?
No, that's helpful. So the advice is that it's not credible to interpret design-led in a way that suggests the application before us hasn't been led by design.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of clarification? Councillor McAdam.
Thank you. Just one very quick question, Chair. Would we normally expect a master plan in a development like this, or any other come to that? Thank you.
Yes, through you, Chair. I mean, I think what's effectively gone over in the actual officer's report is the allocation itself, the allocation as a whole, would normally be accompanied by a master plan. However, as it's been put across this evening, the actual site itself, or a number of portions of that site, have come forward in advance of the actual local plan, the allocation being ratified as part of the local plan. So the ideal scenario would have been, yes, there would have been a master plan before any of the sites had come forward, but unfortunately that wasn't the situation the authority found itself in.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Slade.
I'll just come back to my question about restrictive covenants. Thanks.
I'm not aware of any, I'll be honest, but on the parameter plan, it does mention about water main easements and foul water rising main and easements. Is that what you were referring to, or is there something else?
I can bring in legal on this.
Thank you. Yeah, through you, Chair. Restrictive covenants, easements, anything related to sort of private rights and are not really the sort of purview of the planning committee. An applicant applies for planning permission. They have to then be able to realise that planning permission by making sure all the necessary consents with other landowners, things like that, are all in situ before they can build out. They obviously come to the planning local planning authority for planning permission, but then they need to make sure that they've served the correct certificates in terms of land ownership. They have to deal with that point. Frankly, anyone could apply for planning permission anywhere. Whether they can then realise that is a sort of wider point, and we can't be bogged down by those kind of conflicts which go on outside of the officers' sort of capabilities to negotiate that. That's for the applicants.
Okay, thank you. I get that. It's just, I mean, we're all here spending this time discussing this, and it's, I mean, if those restricted covenants have got stuff in them that would negate having this conversation, I'm sure the developers have looked at that, but it would just be useful to kind of know those background pieces sometimes.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next part of the meeting, which is the debate, where councillors can speak about how they are thinking and how they want to move ahead in making a decision. Is there anyone who would like to start that debate for me? Councillor Niche, thank you.
I can't believe I put my hand up for that one. I'm just going to make some observations, really, for for other deliberations, I suppose. The first one I looked at, is it allocated? Well, yes, it is. So clearly that's a tick in the box. Are we in tilted balance? Yes. Does it make a difference to this one? I don't know whether it does or not, to be honest, because it was in the local plan anyway. So tilted balance might not make a difference, but I'm not sure about it does on the number game. None of the technical consultees have had issues with it. What I do have problems with in my own mind is still this density factor. The fact that it's on the edge, the fact that it's trying to separate between Houghton, Witton and St Ives. The allocation, had it been potentially 88 as opposed to potentially 120, might have made my mind a bit clearer. I think it has been design-led, although I do comprehend there's not been a master plan that sometimes comes with this one, but it obviously has to link into the other phases. And I suppose from a master plan perspective, I mean, it's only really been 2 years since this came in, and I know there's others. My main concern, as I think a number of the speakers have said as well on this one, is just this business around density, which I still haven't quite got my head round as to. There seems to be a variation of density on some of it, which I'll be honest, I can't see in here because we're just being asked to look at up to 120. So if it goes through and officers recommend it, they could look at it and say, Wes, we can adjust that to ensure that it doesn't look quite so built up on that edge. I think I'll leave it there, Chair, because at the moment I'm a little bit betwixt and between on it. There's some good aspects on it from a fact that it was originally, as I said, originally allocated. Yes, we do need housing. There's affordable housing there, but there always has to be a balance. And I just have a slight concern on not necessarily the gap, because I think the gap is variable. I think it's just maybe how it looks as a gap with the density on the edge. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. Just playing second fiddle to Councillor Niche now because he's stolen a lot of what I was about to say. I think the two issues, I'm not going to labour the point, so the density and the gap between what's now going to become Houghton and St Ives. I think on both counts, I'd like to have seen it sort of lower, lower on the density and obviously greater on the gap. The gap, sort of carries lesser weight. I think we're not going to be able to sort of dictate too much on that one because I think it's there is a gap and it's there's obviously no politics. It's not a set figure there, is there? That you must have a gap. So that doesn't exist. There is a gap, and that's what we've got to run with at the moment. I'm more towards approval, but I'm not there yet. I think I take comfort in, and I hope that should this go further, I hope that the residents have all spoken very passionately and very, with good cases, how they can take some sort of the right word now, but some heart out of the fact that this is only an outline application at the moment. There's obviously a phenomenal amount of work gone into this already, just in the pack alone. There's let alone the application, and I think there's a phenomenal amount of work yet to get it to a full application. So I think we have to take some heart from the fact that this will come back to us, I'm sure, to sort of tidy this one up, and hopefully between now and then, should it go down that route, some of these issues will be cleared up, and it should make it a little bit easier when it does come back as a full application. But again, I'll leave it there and just sort of see where the debate takes us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gorson.
Thank you, Chair. Again, we've heard from all of the speakers, they're not necessarily against development. They're against, what they're concerned with is some of the separation, some of the density and so on. And when you look at the northern part, that's where they're saying, well, overall the site is at 32.6, I think it was, 32.3 density, but with the northern part going to be at a reduced density, that means the rest is going to be at a higher. So we've not got that site, we've not got that insight, because obviously that will come later on. And I think, to my mind, it's this 10% of 400 that is the problem. And if you want to play devil's advocate, they could have gone as a total for the whole site of 440, another 15 on top of this. Were it to be just 10% of the site, the 88, I think we wouldn't have this discussion. I think it would have been fairly well gone through, but it just seems that the other sites, by not having that extra, it's brought it to a head here. And yeah, I'm still undecided on this one. There's a long way to go, but I do think we do need to really think long and hard to make sure that what we're developing here is something that is good for St Ives, for Houghton and so on. We do need to get this right.
Thank you, Councillor Gawson. Councillor Jordan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everybody who's come here tonight to talk so passionately about this. Yeah, I agree with what's been said before. I have concerns about the density. I think if we were just putting those 80 houses on there, I think the parish would have agreed with it and worked very closely. I do have concern that there wasn't a master plan. I understand your reasons for it, but it does go through the whole of this report, whether it's your report or the parish council's report. And it just seems a shame that didn't happen. I still have concerns about the traffic as well. That junction is very wide, and I understand about the movements, but that traffic's got to go somewhere, and it's going to go down to a road, to another set of traffic lights, to another set of traffic lights, and it's got to go somewhere, and there's nowhere else for it to go except Harrison's Way if you're going to work in Cambridge, or the guided bus, or into Huntingdon. So I'm afraid I have some really grave concerns about this. As I said, the dentistry one is one of them. And I'm yet to be convinced that I would approve this. I know a lot of work has gone into this, and I thank the officer for the report, but I still have grave concerns about it.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Corney that, well, first of all, I think the people here this evening, I think the parish council have spoken very well. They've clearly put a lot of work into their submissions, and I do appreciate their concerns. But I think they should take some heart, I think, with Councillor Corney's phrase, some comfort perhaps. This is a outline application, as we know. Important that we bear that in mind. So it will come back, reserved matters, I assume, will come back to this committee at some stage. And questions, we don't have the details, of course, by definition, yet. So I think some of the questions that we've got will be answered as we go through the process, were we to approve this evening, as we go through the reserved matters stage. I think it was it Councillor Niche? Probably, apologies if I've misquoted you, John, or somebody mentioned sorry, it was Councillor Gawson, the allocation. We've got a clear answer, and it's in the report 7.23. It's within the 10% threshold, isn't it? But it's across the allocated site in the local plan. And we've also had, I think, a pretty clear answer about the distances. I think Councillor Dew, when he spoke, mentioned the football field analogy. But I think I actually should know the answer to this question because I'm a football fan, but I think the shortest distance is actually just under 131 metres. So some of the distances between this area and St Ives will be further than that. They'll be greater than that. I'm inclined, and we also had a very clear answer from Jez Tuttle from the County Council Highways. I'm inclined that we approve this application, but I'm happy to hear from other speakers. Thank you.
Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm also grateful to all who've brought forward views this evening, but clearly many more have inputted into the views we've heard represented tonight, and it's certainly clear what the strength of local feeling is. I think, as we referenced earlier, and I had an exchange with Councillor Keane, I think he acknowledged that for better or ill, that this isn't a democratic decision in the normal sense of the term. It's a decision we need to take as democratically elected councillors on the interpretation of our rules and policies, the local ones, the national ones, that the law requires us to apply here. So, as Councillor Dew noted, the question for us isn't what would be ideal, what would be an easy decision to take, what's the most popular one. It's on the application before us, and we need to make a decision that's defensible. We heard from one of our speakers, DMC makes the final decision. That's obviously only true if we do make a decision we then successfully defend. Otherwise, we don't make the final decision, and any conditions we might wish to apply to an application fall by the wayside as well. So a decision that's not defensible, overturned on appeal, can be, if I can put it like this, worse as an outcome from the point of view of those who don't wish it to take place than a decision by our committee to approve with the various conditions we're able to apply. So I suppose that's the context of our conversation, as I know we all well appreciate. Councillor Niche raised question about whether the tilted balance made a difference here. I appreciate that was I think a partly rhetorical point, but for avoidance of doubt, the tilted balance very much is relevant. We've heard that clearly from our officers. I mean, it's demonstrably true given our housing numbers. And what that means is that to defend refusing this application, acknowledging it is simply an outline application, as Councillor Pitt's drawn attention to, we need to consider that not only that it does harm, but that harm significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits here. And that is a high threshold for defending refusal. On a couple of the points that colleagues have picked up around the table, I don't think it's credible to say that this hasn't been design-led either, which is the necessary belief I think we'd have to take to dismiss the 10% threshold sort of out of hand. I think the 10% tolerance clearly does apply to the 400, so sort of 440 homes within the tolerance of the policy, a policy that allows going beyond that tolerance in certain situations, but that don't arise here. I think that is clearly the context we need to make a decision in. We've heard clearly that original 400 figure isn't separated out by section of this allocation. It's a figure across the allocation as a whole. So I don't see we can defend an interpretation that says we can only look at the number of houses we would have expected in this section of the allocation and then apply 10% to that. So I don't see that the numbers of houses here present a defensible ground for refusal in my mind. And as Councillor Pitt and Councillor Corney have drawn attention to, because it's outlined, it's up to that number. The Reserve Matters applications will still have to show that the number they did pick complied with the various rules. Councillor Jordan raised transport concerns, again, which are hugely understandable, particularly for many of us who know that route well, and congestion on it. But highways we're very grateful having Highways officer here this evening. I think in the context of the Highways position on this and the lack of objection, there's clearly no defensible refusal on transport grounds here either. For me, colleagues, where my primary concerns are around the gap between the communities. I think even if the neighbourhood plan carries no weight on the basis of the argument in our officer's report, our own plan policy SI1 in paragraph G does talk about the need to recognise boundaries in view of tilted balance, we can only apply some weight to that, but I think there's clearly a weight that we should have in our mind, and clearly that's a relevant factor for the local communities. So I think the decision I'm weighing up in my mind is, to the extent that we can apply weight to that requirement, and to the extent that the application before us impacts the boundary between the communities, which I think it demonstrably does, even if you can reach different sort of subjective views about how significant that is. The question I'm weighing up is that impact so significant that there's significant and demonstrable harm here, and that's the hurdle I'm not seeing that is reached, even though that's my, I think, primary area of concern after having heard others' views and officers' advice. It's around that gap. I think that's clearly an issue in our policies and for the community, but I don't think we can credibly defend it big enough of an issue to refuse this application. So I'm certainly minded to support this outline application, and I'm open to hearing views from others as well, but I am prepared to make a proposal if you would like one at this stage, Chair.
If you're willing to put that as a proposal, then I will accept that as a proposal. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this separation gap that we're all looking at, I don't think it would make much difference whether you build 88 on there or 120. That gap is going to be much the same, and I doubt whether it would change at all. So forget about the gap. That gap is there. The density I have problems with, and I feel for quite a few of the speakers that have been before us tonight, and I understand their feelings. But we as a panel, we have to decide whether the benefits outweigh the harm, basically, and that's always our question. Do the benefits outweigh the harm? And I feel that it's a difficult decision, but the benefits of the extra dwellings cancels out the harm. Because if we refuse this, the 106 monies will change. Well, at least anyway, as if that's assuming that it doesn't go to appeal. So we gain on the 106 if we accept it as it is, and we gain on the affordable, which is very important, and it probably means another 30 or 13 houses, I think, more on the affordable side. So I shall be supporting the decision to recommend powers be delegated to the head of planning. So I'll second Councillor Wakeford's proposal, if you'll accept that.
Thank you. I will accept that as being a second to the proposal. Are there any other speakers that wish to add anything before we go to a decision? Councillor Niche.
Thank you. Just a point of clarity for those listening, both here and elsewhere. Does this come back as full to DMC? Yeah.
Can I bring you in just to confirm?
I mean, yes, in terms of the reserve matters submission, that is something that could be potentially called in by members. Obviously, it could be referred from my position in terms of the development service manager. So, yes, at this stage, yes. However, there is the national scheme of delegation that, subject to how that's worded, may change that. But as it stands at this moment in time, the answer is yes, Councillor.
Thank you. So we have a recommendation that the powers be delegated to the head of planning, infrastructure and public protection to approve, subject to conditions and completion of a section 106 application, or refuse in the event that the obligation referred to above has not been completed and the applicant is unwilling to agree to an extended period for determination, or on the grounds that the applicant is unwilling to complete the obligation necessary to make the development acceptable. All those.
Chair, but forgive me, before you take a vote, there was just one point that I'm conscious we haven't picked up the reference from the highways officer about the change of technology on the junction that would assist the congestion issues. Is there any condition that it would be helpful to add to the proposal to make that more likely to happen?
Take that one. So yes, in terms of the proposed conditions, there is a list in section 8 of the report, and the third one up from the bottom says the installation of mover at the site access signal control junction with the A1123 prior to occupation. In brackets after that, it says unless provided by Morris Homes in the meantime under section 278 works. So yes, we have added that as a condition, having received the comments through from the Highways Transport Assessment team.
So forgive my lack of expertise about the highways technologies. So that the reference from our highways officer this evening wasn't to anything beyond what's covered in the recommending conditions already. In which case, forgive me, carry on, Chair. The
Right.
proposal stands unamended.
So we will go to the vote. So we are voting for approval to delegate powers to the head of planning. All those in favour of approval, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Any against?
1, 2, 3.
Any abstentions? Therefore, that has been approved to delegated powers. So we will move on to our next item. Oh, actually, we will stop there because we have been going for a little while, and we will just have a comfort break.
Chair, can I just say that
We will now move on to item 4A on our agenda, which is a planning application in Stowlonger, Catworth, Spalding and Kimbolton and Stoneleigh. And our planning officer, Holly Rennie, will present that to us.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, committee. This application is being presented to committee as the officer recommendation of approval is contrary to the recommendation of the parish councils. This is a full application for the erection of a solar farm, battery energy storage system and associated equipment and infrastructure, including a substation to provide a connection to the grid. This slide shows the application site outlined in red. The site is located in the countryside in the west of the district, south of the A14 and northwest of Grafham Water. The application site measures around 94 hectares and is currently agricultural land. There is already an existing solar farm at Rookery Farm. However, the current proposal will operate entirely independently of the existing solar farm. The nearest villages to the proposal are Stowlonger and Spaldwick, which are located to the east and northeast. As illustrated by the plans on screen, there are no constraints on the site itself, with the exception of several public footpaths and bridleways which cross the application site. The closest heritage assets are the Grade 2 star listed St Botolph's Church and Stowlonger Conservation Area, which are located to the east. The application is accompanied by an agricultural land classification report, which, based on intrusive soil investigations, confirms that the majority of the site is Grade 3B land, i.e. not best and most versatile agricultural land. So the proposal comprises of three main component parts. A solar farm and a battery energy storage system, which is also referred to as a BESS, are to be located on the land highlighted yellow on screen. These elements will be accessed from Stow Road using the existing tracks serving Rookery Farm. A UKPN substation will be located on the land highlighted blue on screen and will be accessed from Thrapston Road via existing farm tracks. The substation is located adjacent to existing high voltage overhead pylons, which it will connect into to provide the connection to the grid. An underground cable, which is highlighted green on screen, will connect the solar farm and the BESS to the UKPN substation. So this slide shows the proposed layout of the solar farm and the BESS, with the layout of the UKPN substation shown in the top right-hand corner. The solar panels, which are coloured blue on screen, will be arranged in straight rows and cover an area of almost 65 hectares. The area shown in turquoise is a biodiversity enhancement area, which will provide grassland and wildflowers to support wildlife. The UKPN substation covers a rectangular area measuring approximately 1.2 hectares in the north of the site. The solar panels and the BESS will have a lifespan of 40 years, after which they would be removed from the site. The UKPN substation will become a permanent part of national grid infrastructure. This slide shows elevations of the equipment proposed to be installed for the solar farm. The solar panels will have a maximum height of 3 metres, and amongst the panels will be 11 inverters, which are housed in containers which have the appearance of a shipping container. The solar farm will be enclosed by perimeter fencing, which measures 2.5 metres in height, and pole-mounted CCTV will be erected at regular intervals around the boundary. This slide shows the layout of the BESS and the elevations of some of the equipment. The main components of the BESS are the batteries and the power conversion units, which are housed in containers that look a lot like a shipping container. Other small prefabricated buildings will house equipment required in association with the BESS and the solar panels. The BESS will be enclosed by an acoustic fence which measures 3 metres in height. The image on the top half of this slide shows an elevation of the substation equipment, which would be housed within an acoustic security fence. This includes transformers, disconnectors, circuit breakers and bus bars, the highest of which would be around 7.6 metres in height. Within this area there are also 4 floodlighting columns which would only be switched on in the event of an emergency. The images on the bottom left of this slide show elevations of the equipment which will be located outside of but adjacent to the UKPN substation, and this includes a communications tower which is 25 metres in height. The image on the bottom right is a photo montage of the UKPN substation as viewed from the nearest footpath in year 1, before any boundary planting matures. During the course of the application, a number of panels have been removed to accommodate additional planting, particularly new hedgerow and trees along the site boundaries and alongside the public rights of way. Where public rights of way pass through the site, these are accommodated within green corridors which measure at least 10 metres in width, as illustrated by the cross sections on screen. In many places, the width of the green corridor exceeds the minimum 10 metres. The photo montages show a view looking towards the solar panels from an adjacent public right-of-way at year 1 and then at year 15 once the boundary planting matures. The key issues shown on side have all been assessed in detail within the officer's report. The proposal would make a significant contribution towards the delivery of renewable energy by 2030, for which there is a nationally identified need to meet legally binding government targets. This is afforded significant weight as a benefit of the proposal. This is in addition to the benefits it can deliver for biodiversity and the local economy. No adverse impacts associated with the proposal have been identified which would demonstrably and significantly outweigh these benefits. So for the reasons set out in the officer's report, officers are satisfied that the current proposal is compliant with the development plan and with national planning policy. The officer's recommendation is therefore that the application should be approved, subject to a unilateral undertaking for BNG monitoring and conditions which are set out at the end of the officer's report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to speakers for this particular application. Our first speaker is Councillor James Matthews from Stow Longer Parish Council. Welcome. And when you're ready, you can press the middle button and you have 3 minutes in which to speak to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I speak on behalf of Stow Longer Parish Council to reiterate our clear and united objection to the proposed solar farm and battery energy storage system at Rookery Farm. This application represents a vast and inappropriate industrialisation of our countryside, and we strongly urge this committee to follow precedent and refuse it. In January 2024, this committee rightly refused a similar solar farm application at Haddon on 4 sound planning grounds. Each of those reasons for refusal applies with even greater force to the Stow Longer proposal before you today. First, the issue of agricultural land. The Haddon application was refused due to the irreversible loss of 8.3 hectares of grade 3A land, the best and most versatile, contrary to local plan policies LP10 and LP35. In Stow Longer, we faced a loss of a far greater area, over 90 hectares. And I know football pitches seems to have been used an awful lot this evening, but that's 148 football pitches. In Stow Longer, we faced a loss of a far greater area. This is productive farmland in a village with a centuries-long history of arable cultivation. It contributes directly to UK food security, and its loss has not been justified, particularly given national planning guidance to prioritise poorer quality land. The same policy rationale that led to refusal at Haddon must apply here. Secondly, landscape harm. The Haddon site was refused because it sat within the Northern Wolds landscape character area, where its size and siting overwhelmed the natural valley landscape and harmed views from public rights of way. The Stow Longer site is also in the Northern Wolds LCA and even larger in scale, wrapping around the entire western side of the village and abutting ancient pathways and a Grade 2 listed church. It will enclose our community in an industrial corridor of panels, fencing and floodlights. The impact on rural character and visual amenity, including views to and from St Botolph's Church, is severe and enduring. The visual harm recognised in Haddon applies even more acutely here. Third, amenity impact. The Haddon refusal highlighted the harm to the living environment of nearby residents through noise, lighting, glint and glare. At Stow Longer, residents will be significantly closer to the BESS compound, transformers and inverters than at Haddon, in some cases within 0.5 miles. In fact, according to the on-site wide master plan, the solar panels are in fact within 250 metres of properties in Church Walk. We have no street lighting in our village, and the introduction of high masts, PIR lights and substation floodlights into this dark rural setting is wholly inappropriate. Glint, glare, and operational noise will materially harm the peace and amenity of our residents. Councillors in Haddon, this committee rightly prioritise landscape character, amenity, agricultural protection and policy compliance. The harm here is not theoretical, it is real, long-term and unjustified. We respectfully ask you to be consistent, to uphold your local plan and the principles behind your previous decisions and to refuse this application. I'm willing to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? There are no questions. Thank you for joining us this evening. Our next speaker is Councillor Jonathan Gray. Welcome.
I haven't had this pleasure for a very long time. Good to see you all.
You may start.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm here to represent the views of a significant majority of the people that I represent, who are asking you to refuse this application that's before you this evening. And I don't think I've ever seen an application that's actually managed to cover 4 separate parishes. So this is a new record on me. I don't believe that the application is consistent with a reasonable interpretation of our own policies. And obviously with 3 minutes, I can't go into the reasons why, but I do have some highlights that I can add. LP10 has already been discussed this evening, directing us away from using prime agricultural land. It's very interesting that this is deemed to not be high grade. I've seen plenty of corn and wheat come off that over the years. They must not give rise to noise, obtrusive light, other impacts. Plenty of that going on here. LP35 has already been mentioned. Have the adverse planning impacts and the potential harm been fully identified? We've talked a lot about harm this evening. And whilst I see the assessments in the officers' reports, for me, the one missing piece is the sheer scale of this proposal and the impact in its totality upon our landscape. And however you cut this, as you've heard already, this really is an industrialisation of the landscape. 10-metre lighting poles, literally miles of fencing in some places, the hemming in of footpaths and byways, a communication tower. Our own plan, I think, points us towards preserving sort of field patterns and long distance views. You've got that a lot at the moment when you go on those footpaths, that will get lost. The ministerial statement has a commitment to us maintaining the current level of domestic food production, struggling to see how we're going to do that if we keep taking agricultural land, however and whatever the grade is, out of production. So where's Huntingdonshire making that up from, I would ask you, going forward? I think the landscape assessment underplays the sensitive nature of the landscape that we're in. So there are lots of other reasons I could cite. I commend the comments, particularly of the CPRE for Cambridgeshire. I think there's good solar and there's not so good solar, and I'm very clear that in my mind that if you approve the application as it stands, may not be many residents that I represent in Stow Longer, but it will have a dramatic impact upon their enjoyment of a very rural part of our countryside. And I'd urge you to consider that that might be more harm than the benefits that are being proposed. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Are there any questions? There are no questions, so thank you very much. We will move on to our next speaker, which is Jonathan Selwyn, who is the applicant. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. You have 3 minutes in which to address the committee, and when you're ready, press the middle button.
Good evening, Chair and members. My name is Jonathan Selwyn. I'm the Managing Director of Bluefield Renewable Developments, the applicant for this project. The Bluefield Group is a UK-based business which develops, builds and operates solar and battery projects. We have 150 UK-based staff and are funded by Bluefield Solar Income Fund and the local authority pension platform, GLIL. We've invested nearly £2 billion in solar and battery projects, providing around 3% of UK daytime electricity. Why solar? Because it's now the lowest cost and quickest to deploy of all energy sources, and it's already making a significant difference. For example, earlier today it was providing a quarter of the UK's electricity, and over the last few months, solar has provided up to 40% of UK daytime electricity. Because we own and operate the projects we develop, we establish long-term relationships with local communities and local authorities. Turning now to the Rookery Farm project, we've worked very closely with the council and statutory consultees throughout Rookery Farm's development. Together with community engagement, this has helped to shape and improve the design of the overall scheme, including significant changes to landscaping and ecology features. There are no objections from statutory consultees. As already mentioned, the proposed site comprises predominantly Grade 3B land, therefore not best and most versatile. As part of this application, existing hedgerows will be strengthened and new sections of hedgerows and trees will be planted, delivering a biodiversity net gain of 75%. Once operational, the solar farm will feature over 24 acres of new protected biodiversity enhancement areas, wildflower planting and sheep grazing. We already graze sheep very successfully on over 50% of our solar farms. The rights of way will be safeguarded and will not be diverted either during or after construction. There's good access for construction traffic to the site, and once operational, only once a month will the site be visited on average. There's no lighting permanently established, only for emergency and only up by the substation area, and some emergency lighting in the BES area. In terms of fire safety, Bluefield undertook detailed engagement with the Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Services, and the planning application includes a bespoke fire safety management plan and other plans. We're committed to contributing funds to local community projects and have pledged a sum of at least £500,000 for local projects, with the majority to be focused on Stow Longer. In conclusion, the Rookery Farm project will make an important contribution to the security of energy supply and to reducing carbon emissions through the provision of local renewable energy, electricity and energy storage. We hope the project will be granted permission and look forward to working with you should it be. Thank you for your time, and I'd welcome some questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from any of our councillors? Councillor Jordan.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming tonight. As you've been alluded to in the application, I think there's a number of rights of way. So would your firm, who you represent, would you be able to maintain those so that they can still be used?
Yes, certainly we're committed to providing minimum distances, as the case officer has outlined, 10 metres fence to fence line, and providing green corridors for those. We won't be diverting or changing any of the existing footpaths.
Thank you very much. Councillor Goulson.
Thank you. In your comment, you mentioned about some funding towards the parish councils. Have you had any consultations or given them information up front as to what this can consist and how they can apply for it?
Yes, we've written a letter stating our commitment of the £500,000. When we work with local communities, we usually route the money through the local parish councils and ask them to suggest the projects that they would most like to support. And we're very much aware of the objections from the parish councils, but notwithstanding that, should the project get permission, we would look to work very closely with the local parish councils in terms of identifying the best projects. We won't be deciding on the projects, they will be.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. 2 questions, if you'll permit me, Chair. Firstly, as as our speaker made reference in comments, but I wonder if you might like to unpack. We've heard concerns described powerfully around the impact of large floodlights on an unlit village. You made some reference already to where there would and wouldn't be lighting, and whether it would or wouldn't be on all the time at night. I just wonder if you could clarify in our minds the extent to which your proposal will or won't be shining flood lighting into a nearby village overnight.
Sure. First of all, UK Power Networks require emergency lighting for their substation area so that if they have to access it at night, they can see where they're going, essentially. And the lighting would only come in on an emergency, and we've been told that's a kind of 1 in 10 years likelihood. The only other lighting would be similarly emergency lighting in the BES area in case there's an emergency there which has to be tackled at night. The CCTV cameras are infrared. There'll be no lighting attached to the CCTV cameras. So that is the only lighting, the emergency lighting.
And if I may, Chair, when you say emergency lighting, I think you just referenced this, but emergency lighting doesn't mean lighting that is always on in case of emergencies. It means lighting that can be turned on in case of emergencies. Sorry, as you're the expert on this, just to clarify that for us.
That's right. So UKPN would have the right to turn on the lighting in the case of an emergency, but it will not be on all the time, certainly.
Thank you. If that was a follow-up to the first question, may I still ask the second one? I'm sorry, Chair. And even the microphone has had enough. So I'll take that as a hint. But briefly, the objectives we've heard made particular reference to the impact of the application on food production, and it's mostly 3B, that there's some 3A land. We read that there would still be use for food production with grazing around the panels. I just wondered to what extent you're in a position to speak to the sort of relative impact of grazing some sheep around the panels as opposed to the existing use of the land. Are we right to imagine that there's still a significant loss of production? For example, not that you can compare the one to the other directly.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't claim that we would continue to grow crops in the land, but we believe in dual use of the land. As I said, over 50% of our solar farms have sheep grazing. The farmers are very happy with that. We give a license to the existing farmers to graze the sheep. And the anecdotal evidence is that they can get higher numbers of or higher density of sheep grazing because they actually quite like the shelter from the solar panels. So we're very happy to provide that and to license the farmer to graze sheep.
Thank you.
So if I may check, so it's about half the land would be used as half the area of the land would be used as grazing. Is that right?
Well, the majority of the land under the solar panels will be available for grazing, but it's done on rotation. So you wouldn't have all of the land grazed all of the time because there wouldn't be enough food for the sheep. So you rotate them.
Thank you very much. Councillor McAdam.
Thank you, Chair. I'm thinking about environmental things. Bear with me. This is going to be a project which, as in practically all cases, last for 40 years. Now, I'm going to be pushing up the daisies probably well before the 40 years is up. But when you consider that you've got this agricultural land which is being shaded from the sun for 40 years, and you've also got cables running under the ground over a very extensive area, I wonder what the effect of that is going to be on the agricultural land. Now, I read a report recently which actually stated that a lot of companies don't even take up these cables at the end of the year. They take away the actual panels, but there's a lot left which actually contaminates the land. Can you assure us that the land will actually be returned to its prime pristine condition and there won't be any contamination left.
Yeah, I'd
when
like
you
to
leave?
take
Thank you.
both those questions. So, first of all, in terms of decommissioning, decommissioning is required by planning condition, but also by our lease condition. We have to put in place a decommissioning bond with our landowner, and that kicks in year 15 when we value how much it will cost to decommission, and we then have to put the whole amount of the decommissioning cost into an escrow fund. So absolutely, it's required by planning condition and by lease condition. And the second or the first question was about the effect that it has on agricultural land. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that resting the land for 40 years is actually a benefit for the land that until this point has been intensively farmed. So nutrients have been taken out of the soil for many years, and the value of the land has gone down and down as intensive farming has continued. This allows it to regenerate, and it also provides a very important habitat for pollinators, for example, that are not attracted to land which has been intensively used with pesticides and fertilizers.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for this particular speaker? Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. As a non-farmer, maybe to another non-farmer, I don't know, has the landowner indicated that he wishes to graze sheep? Because to my knowledge, it's quite a different style of farming to actually just going on and mowing them up, which is not the technical term, as Councillor Butler will tell me.
Yeah. No, it is certainly a different form of agriculture, but we've very successfully transitioned crop fields into sheep grazing fields, which the farmers who own the land have put in place. We're not farming experts. We defer to the landowners to choose the best way of managing the land. And as I say, generally, those who have crop, they usually have a much wider land holding. So this will be part of the land holding, not the whole of the land holding. They'll continue to grow crops on the other part of the land holding, but they're likely to be in favour, and it's within the lease that they will be able to graze sheep on this land as well.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for this particular speaker? There are no other questions, so thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
We will now move on to questions of clarification for our planning officer. Are there any questions of clarification that you require from the planning officer? Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. So there was some reference to an application in Haddon that was refused. I don't know if you have any information to hand that can shed any further light on comparisons between that site and this one.
Well, obviously, each application has to be decided on its merits. I am aware of the Haddon application, and I know that it was refused on 4 grounds. It was taken to appeal, and the appeal was dismissed. Not all of those 4 grounds were upheld. I don't know if there's particular areas you wanted to go into.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. So the report discusses at some length the policy objective of avoiding best and most versatile land, but the fact that there's no preclusion from using it, but we seek to avoid it where we can. Councillor Gray put to us, I think rhetorically, that we should have in our minds where else in the district equivalent production was going to be found if we approved the application before us. I just wonder if officers would comment on the extent to which that is or isn't a material consideration we should have in our minds, sort of like for like replacement possibility.
So the majority of the land, as I said in the presentation, is 3B, and that's based on intrusive soil investigations. So 3B isn't best and most versatile. Across our district, the majority of agricultural land is best and most versatile. So there is higher quality agricultural land than this site. So the preference is for the development of 3B land over 3A.
Thank you very much. Are there any other councillors that wish to? Councillor Jordan.
Just a couple of questions. So just for clarification on the back of that last question. So is the land at the moment being used as agricultural? Is crops being grown on there?
Yes, I believe there is, yeah, from my site visit.
And the other one was, it says in the report about the boundaries 0.7 miles from the nearest residential properties. It says the minimum distance should be 1 mile. So I was just wondering how you reach that decision. You know, where's your benchmark? You must have to assess that in some way. And I'm wondering how many properties, just for clarification.
Yeah, so the nearest properties are on Church Lane in Stow Longer, and it's approximately 250 metres from the edge of the solar farm to those properties. I think that's the reference to the 1 mile. Was that from within representations? Yeah, so there's no set minimum distance within planning policy or government guidance as to the minimum distance between a solar panel and a house. What we have to assess is the impact of that distance, and that's in terms of visual amenity, but also in terms of glint and glare, and those two can combine and they could have an impact on residential amenity, and both of those have been assessed within the report, and it's considered that, yes, there's a distance of 250 metres, but in this case, there's intervening vegetation and the impact wouldn't be significant on residential amenity to justify refusal.
Are there any other councillors with a question of clarification for our planning officers? There are no other questions of clarification, so that will take us into the debate. Who would like to start the discussion? Councillor Butler?
Thank you, Chairman. Can you put up the slide that shows the grade of the land? We hadn't got that in our pack, and that came up one of your first slides, I think. That's the one. Yeah. Thank you. Well, we're supposed to avoid best, most versatile, but we're not doing 3A. It shows the majority of the site as 3B. To be honest, I don't know where you get the certification of what this is, whether it's ministry land or what, but I was looking at that site yesterday. It's not grade 3B land in my mind as a farmer. It's growing cereals on there. It's and it looks quite productive. So it's not as if it's scrub land, you can't use it for anything else. It's very productive, arable land, which is not, I don't consider what we're about. There are plenty of places to put something like this. There's plenty of roofs around now where these could go and do a better job, possibly, only on a smaller scale, I know. when you look at this site, if you ride around from the Stolonga area, it's right basically on the top of a hill. It's very visible from all directions, especially from Stolonga, and you're only talking about 250 metres away from the first property. It's got to have an effect on their visual amenity there. It doesn't comply with LP10. And as I say, there is some 3B, there's some 3A in there, which it shouldn't be there anyway. That's a section that needs to come out. So I won't be supporting this, Chairman. You won't be surprised to know. I think it affects a large area, food security. It affects all the villages all around that site, because as I say, it's up on a hill if you look at it, and I don't agree with it at all. So I won't be supporting it, Chairman.
Are there any other councillors that wish to contribute? Councillor Clark.
Yes, I'd like to build on what Councillor Butt said. I happen to farm all 3 or 4 grades of farmland next to Upwood Airfield. Don't be put off by this 3B. There's plenty of people in the country growing over 4 tonne of wheat off grade B. And the reason it's grade 3B is because it's heavy clay and you can't grow onions and potatoes on it, and where you can the others. And that's where there is a difference. There's many farmers who prefer to farm 3B land than have all the agonies of potatoes and onions on the other land. So forget about that. And going back to old-fashioned things, that equates to 207 acres. And at 4 tonnes an acre, that's 800 tonnes of wheat that will be taken out of the food line. That's a lot of bread. And I feel it's probably not relevant here, but that sort of acreage for this sort of thing should be on the Brecklands in Norfolk, where they can't grow anything, where they grow wild grasses. And for me, I'll be supporting my colleague and I'll be voting against it. Thank you, Chair.
Is there anyone else? Councillor Jordan.
Yes, I'm grateful actually for that clarification. That's why I asked the question, was it still being, crops being grown on it? Because I'm not a farmer, but I walked around it and I came to the same conclusion as the 2 previous councillors. And I think there is something about protecting our land for growing our own wheat and crops. So I'm afraid I don't think I will be supporting it as well.
I would like to bring in our planning officer who will tell us a little bit more about the land and the grading.
Yes, thank you, Chair, through you. In terms of the report that's in front of members this evening, I mean, it starts towards the bottom of page 331 and continues over to page 332, which, just for clarity on that plan, it does mention that the larger percentage of the land, which is yellow, is 3B, the small portion of 3A. I mean, hopefully all that section, and it finishes on top end of page 333, adds a little bit of clarity. However, just whilst no decision's been put forward yet, whether it's in line with officer report or contrary, obviously there is just to remind members that were members to come to a contrary view to the officers, it would for members to defend the application appeal. So just want to clarify that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. I do struggle with these ones from a perspective of we just seem to be glazing over literally fields and fields, and there is a benefit from it. We do need electricity. We need more of it. We need renewables. but it's the expense which I really struggle with. Some of this about losing, it might not be the most valuable, but it's certainly very productive land. I mean, I too went up there and thought, there's a lot of stuff. That's all I can say being grown there. I'm not a farmer. It could have been wheat, it could have been barley. Whatever it was growing well. And so that's the bit I struggle with. I also, obviously, on the other side, we are being directed, should I say, not by officers here. Well, we are, because obviously they're following government and policy guidelines. Yet it does say here that we should attribute weight to our local plan because this is below the threshold of a national, what's it called? A national bloody thingamajig of importance. That's the one, National Significant Infrastructure Project. Thank you. Thanks for the nods. So this is the bit where I struggle with because what we got before us is not giving us an alternative, which is what we don't get, of putting it on roofs, which is one we keep thinking of. Is actually just saying, this is what you've got, this is what we're going to do, we're going to glaze over it, we're going to put a load of fencing around it. It's not going to be that visible. Well, actually, yes, it is. Once all the hedges grow up, it might be less visible. It's still certainly visible from otherwise. And yes, I see that there's no, there's going to be big poles up there, but the floodlights won't be on, so that's a benefit. I just still struggle with these as we did with the Haddon one on this. And I just can't reconcile the fact that we are losing some of the not the most versatile, not the most valuable land, but useful land that is providing us with food when we are struggling to get it in from elsewhere, or we're importing it from across the seas. So I'm still struggling with it. So I'm a bit balanced on it, I'm afraid. But I do see that within policies, there's a bit of an uphill fight on it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. We clearly need to be able to defend our decision as a council, whichever way we make one, and officers have reminded around our process where we're departing from officer advice. But I think we also need to be mindful that in order to defend, even to explain our position, which is a necessary precursor of defending it, we need to be clear on what basis we've done that. So again, I appreciate sort of rhetorical comments about sort of forget about what's in front of us, but I'm conscious of the guidance that we've had and the factual information we've got in the report about the productive capacity of the land, and I suppose I would urge colleagues to have regard to the need to use that as a basis to inform our discussions. We have had reminded for us by officers the fact that I certainly understand, though I defer completely to colleagues either side of me on technical matters of farming, that Cambridgeshire is disproportionately endowed with land in higher value categories, and hunts as well compared to the rest of the country. And there is clearly a potential argument, that there is an intellectually coherent argument that says, therefore, we shouldn't have any renewable energy here. It should be somewhere else, with lower land values, sort of no matter what the other, local planning factors and objections might be. And we've heard reference to the attractiveness of putting them somewhere else with lower quality land. I am conscious, of course, we have to apply our local plan, and our local plan doesn't say no solar power anywhere here. Solar power should be somewhere else. We have a local plan that has a policy provision in LP 35 that's referenced in the report, and it's explained in further reasoning in the local plan in 8.50. That we're recognising the relevant Cambridgeshire Renewables Infrastructure Framework having demonstrated significant potential for renewable energy generation in Hunts specifically, especially from among others in a list, solar sources. So we do have a local plan that supports the principle of solar generation in our district, notwithstanding the fact that the land in our district is more productive than some land in the country. So that's the policy context I think that we're starting from. I think there have been concerns articulated about impact on food production, which are absolutely real and material concerns. Councillor Gray, I think, referenced national government policy around food security, which is absolutely a factor for us. Clearly, there is national government as well as local policy around the importance of decarbonisation and renewable power generation as well, which brings significant harms that I think we do need to set against significant benefits, which we do need to set against those harms. So I certainly understand concerns articulated from around the table so far this evening. I'm struggling, I think, to see how they would formulate into a defensible objection of the proposal before us in the context of where it's being brought forward, in the context of our local plan, in the context of the benefits it brings, which isn't to deny at all the as I say, the sort of broader food security arguments, as well as the more particular arguments we've heard articulately presented by local representatives on the local community. But our bread and butter is weighing up the harms and benefits overall here, and I'm far from clear. I see a defensible vote to refuse this. I'm certainly interested to hear what others say. My mind remains open, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Gorson, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at 7.101. An agricultural land survey report was based on desk study and field work, and that was submitted with the application. I've got concerns that this is an application. It is a major part of what could be good agricultural land. We don't know. This is based on a desk study, could be. With some field work. However, we balance that with the use of BMV, best most versatile land, is not prohibited, although the impact is expected to be considered. And we've heard that this could be quite impactful on what is a delivery of produce. So I have a concern there, but I will listen to the rest, because at the end of the day, we still do need to have some form of electricity to produce, so we can cook what we produce on the land. So it is a bit of a catch-all here and catch-22 sort of thing. But I just need to hear a bit more on this, because at the end of the day, it'd be better if we understood and had a national policy or national statement as to what land is best most versatile, what is in 3A, what is in 3B, what is in 2, and what is in 4. Whereas here we're going on a desk study, which I just feel is a bit vague.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting discussion so far. I think where my head is at the moment is our job is to test whether we agree with officers' interpretation of planning law. And I think we're in a danger of testing whether we agree with the planning law itself or regulations themselves. So for me personally, the question of food security against energy security is an interesting one. I feel like I've said this before in a similar planning meeting, but that's a personal opinion that I don't bring to this meeting. Really, the test is the application in front of us compliant with legislation? And my view at the moment, as this debate stands, is that it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Nish summed it up when I think, again, I may misquote you, John, we would face an uphill struggle at appeal with this. I don't think I've really heard any clear reasons from those who've spoken and said that they're opposed to this recommendation. I'm not clear of their grounds of objection. If we're going to take a vote, and I'm not sure if it's been proposed and seconded, but I'd like to hear clear reasons for declining this. It is compliant with policy. Seems very clear to me that it is from the report. So if we are to bring this to a conclusion, I'd like to hear some grounds if people are going to propose an amendment to decline. Thank you.
Councillor McAdam.
Thank you, Chair. When I look at this, my gut feeling is I'm against it, purely pretty much because of the sheer size of it. We're getting huge, great developments like this going on. This is one of the largest, and also the visibility of it. But at the same time, as being stated, we need to have a very solid reason to say no, and I'm struggling to find one other than that what I've just said, and I'm not quite sure that really is good enough material reasons to go against it. So therefore, regretfully, I feel I'm going to support the motion and support the application. Thank you.
Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. And on Councillor McAdam's remarks, I'm certainly not aware of any policy in our plan that limits the scale of a solar application. So I think he's absolutely right that's not a material consideration to my mind. I just wonder if you could bring officers in on Councillor Gulson's comments about the status of the land having been determined by desktop survey. I think I understood earlier officers made reference to testing of soil, just in case there was, talking at cross purposes, and I misunderstood that. I wonder if, risk of jumping back in the debate, Chair, officers could just clarify that for us, please.
Through you, Chair. Yes, there's an agricultural land classification report, which is based on a desktop study, but also they've tested the soil. So they've done boreholes and tested the soil to determine its quality.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that wishes to contribute to the discussion? So Councillor Sanderson, did you have
I will propose approval of the recommendation, Chair.
Okay, do we have someone to second that proposal? Councillor Pitt. Therefore, we will go to a vote. All those in favour of approval, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Any abstentions?
It's 2.
Therefore, that has been approved. We will now move on to our next item on the agenda. And we'll just allow our planning officer to come and settle down and get her presentation ready. Okay, so we're moving on to item 4B and C on our agenda, which is a change of use within Market Square in St Neots.
Thank you.
Chairman, just before you start, how do we assess this? Are we going to do it as two applications, or is it, if the first one passes,
It will be presented as one application, but then we will have a vote on the application and then on the listed building consent.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So just to clarify, these are two separate applications under consideration, one for full planning permission and one for listed building consent. While I'll present these applications together, it's for members to determine them separately. So the applications have been referred to DMC as the officer recommendation for approval is contrary to that of St Neots Town Council. The site comprises two Grade 2 listed buildings within St Neots Town Centre, within the conservation area and partly within the scheduled monument of St Neots Priory. Number 7 and number 9 Market Square are three-storey buildings located on the northern side of the Market Square with extensive modern rear extensions to the rear. The buildings have been vacant since 2021 and were last used as a pub/nightclub. Have existing and proposed floor plans here. So the application seeks approval for the change of use of the pub to 9 residential units comprising 5 studios, 1 one-bed and 3 two-bed flats ranging in size from 38 square metres to 84 square metres. An 89 metre square commercial Class E unit is proposed to be retained at ground floor level fronting Market Square. So if you can see my cursor, that's the commercial unit and the residential units on ground floor and unit 4. And then looking at the first floor plans, further units at first floor level. The proposal includes partial demolition of modern rear extensions and the creation of the rear courtyard, which I'll just go back one. So you can see the rear internal courtyard with bin and bike storage. The development would be car-free, which is considered acceptable due to its central location, public transport links and nearby public car parks. And the cycle parking comprises enough room for 12 bikes, which is policy compliant. So proposed first floor plan, and then the second floor plan in the historic part of number 7 and number 9. This is the proposed demolition plan. So the application proposes the retention and restoration of the listed buildings to the front and the retention and conversion of the majority of the brick-built extensions to the rear to form the residential units. The flat roof extension in the central part of the site is proposed to be demolished to create that rear internal courtyard area. So of the existing and proposed front elevation, as you can see, number 7 is retained pretty much as existing. Slight changes to number 9 to create an entrance to that rear internal courtyard area. And then we have some section drawings. So the areas shaded in orange represent new walls, and then the various coloured sections, which you'll see on the following slide, show the residential units proposed, and this is the rear elevation of the building. And I'll just run through some site photos. We've got the front elevation fronting Market Square, the rear elevation on Priory Lane, which is an existing service entrance with residential above and a shop, which isn't included within this application. And then an aerial image and a photo of the plant on the existing roof. So this area, flat roof with all the plant, is what's proposed to be demolished and removed to create that rear internal courtyard with access from Market Square and Priory Lane. And then some internal photographs. So this is the front of number 9, and then further back into the modern rear extensions, the bar area, and then also service areas to the rear. And then some photographs of the upper floors. So this is the more historic part of the listed buildings. As you can see, it's in quite a poor state and needs significant repair works. So in terms of the planning balance, the conservation officer, as set out in their comments and within the report, there would be less than substantial harm to the significance and character of the listed buildings of number 7 and number 9. And this is due to the loss of the commercial use and change of appearance to the ground floor of number 9, including its use as an entranceway to that rear courtyard, as well as the loss of the historical use of the rear extensions at number 7 and number 9. However, there are several benefits, public benefits to the proposal, including bringing vacant heritage assets back into use, contributing to housing supply, retaining a commercial presence on Market Square. The site is sustainably located within the town centre, and the development is also capable of achieving some net gain, although it's exempt from the mandatory 10%. So weighing the harms and benefits, the officer recommendation is that the applications for full planning permission and listed building consent should be approved, and that's subject to those conditions set out at the end of the reports.
We have a speaker, Councillor Vivian Hitchin from St Neots Town Council. Welcome, and thank you for staying with us. And you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of St Neots Town Council. While we support the principle of residential development on this site, we object to this specific proposal on several key grounds. Firstly, this is overdevelopment. 9 units, many of them studios, on a constrained site compromise the quality of accommodation. This raises real concerns about the living environment for future residents and doesn't reflect best practice in design or sustainable housing. Secondly, we object to the loss of valuable retail space. This is a prominent, active frontage on Market Square within the primary shopping area. The replacement commercial space is minimal and poorly integrated. This represents a net loss to the town centre's commercial vitality. Thirdly, the proposal causes harm to heritage. The buildings are Grade 2 listed, located in a conservation area and adjacent to a scheduled monument. While some amendments have been made, the council's conservation officer still concludes the scheme causes less than substantial harm. We do not believe this harm is outweighed by public benefit. The proposal also conflicts with planning policy. Policy LP34 of the Huntingdonshire Local Plan calls for development to conserve heritage assets and their settings. Neighbourhood Plan Policy SS1 supports residential use only where it does not displace existing town centre uses. Policy SS2 supports the reuse of historic buildings for active town centre purposes. Policy PT2 requires adequate parking provision. This application provides none. Our wider concern is this: Planning policy is flawed and at best out of date. Over the past 3 years, the town, district and county councils have worked together and invested millions into improving the High Street and Market Square. Allowing the conversion of a key retail site into housing directly undermines that public investment and is damaging to the local economy and vibrancy of the town centre. I'm almost finished. We urge the committee to refuse this application and invite the applicant to bring forward a revised proposal, one that reduces residential density, retains meaning.
Are you almost finished?
Yep. Meaningful ground floor commercial use and better respects the historic and civil importance
We'll just stop
of this
there now,
location.
because
Thank
that's
you.
gone well over 3 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? There are no questions. Thank you for joining us this evening. We did have the applicant, David Twigden. However, because of medical conditions, he's unable to travel at night. So although he came, because his agenda is last, he's had to go home because he has to go before there's any, before it gets too dark. So he sends his apologies, but he was here to present. And so we will now move on to our next part, which is questions of clarification for our planning officer. Are there any questions? Councillor McAdam.
Thank you very much. I've been on this panel over 3 years now, and looking back, there's been a number of applications in similar vein to this, where a retail building is being changed of use, and we have a general principle here of trying to preserve and maintain our retail outlets, and we have turned down applications fairly similar to this in the past. What makes this so different to what's gone before? Bearing in mind that this is a high street area where, you know, it's rows of shops and businesses, etc., etc., etc. And I would have thought that we should try and actually keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so the councillor from the parish council kind of helpfully set out those policies that have also been referred to in the report, and the application's been assessed against those. So of particular note, LP 22, which I think you'll be familiar with, and I think it's those applications that have been before you before that you've considered, where there is a loss of a local service or community facility, and that includes pubs. It needs to be demonstrated that there's no reasonable prospect of that service being retained or restored, because there's either insufficient community support or reasonable steps have been taken to effectively market the property. So this application was accompanied by extensive marketing information. It was marketed between December 2018 to November 2023 with no offers that would enable the pub to be retained in its current use. The pub has been closed since 2021, and given that duration of marketing with no offers, we're satisfied that the application does demonstrate that there's no reasonable prospect of that service being retained or restored. This is a listed building that has now been vacant for some time. So with the application before us proposing to restore the listed building, albeit introducing residential use, on balance, that's why officers are supportive of this particular proposal.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions of clarification for our planning officer? Oh, Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. Is it helpful to ask briefly if officers might just recap the significance of tilted balance to this application as well, conscious that we heard in contribution from the Town Council that weighing up exercise that they've clearly been through, but officers might wish to speak to that further.
Yeah, so in terms of the policies that are considered out of date, one of those being LP7 for spatial planning areas, which this application is in the spatial planning area of St Neots. So we would give that policy reduced weight, but it complies with that policy because it's in the built up area. And then the other policies that this application is assessed against, mainly LP21, LP22, and those neighbourhood plan policies, we still give them full weight at that time. And as set out in the officer report, it's considered to comply with those policies. But obviously, with any application, we have to conduct a planning balance, and there is the current position is that we haven't got a 5-year housing land supply, so that is given obviously some weight within the balance.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of clarification? There are no other questions of clarification, so that moves us on to the discussion. Who would like to start that? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor McAdam asked the question and Lucy answered it, but it's outlined, isn't it, on paragraph 7.16. This is why it's different from some of the previous applications we've seen. Public house here hasn't been open for some time. The duration of the marketing with no offers has been quite lengthy. And we as a local planning authority are satisfied the application demonstrates there's no reasonable prospect of the service being retained. So I think that's one of the reasons for approval, and I would propose that we approve the application, Chair.
Okay, I'll accept that as a proposal. Councillor Goulston.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Sanderson's sort of beat me to what I was going to say, but it is one they've done everything. It's been closed for some time. They've tried to advertise it as a going concern. It's been proven in other areas, St Ives, whereby there is a requirement for some of this, some of these properties for people that don't have cars. They're more township or city dwellers or whatever you want to call them, but a small area where cycles would be the preference. And to that, I would second, if you're taking that at the moment, this application.
Thank you. I'll take that as a second for the proposal. Is there anyone else that wishes to contribute to the discussion? No? Oh, Councillor Wakeford, and then we'll move to...
Go on. So I think there's, as the Town Council representative drew attention to, there's obviously significant work that's been underway in St Neots to support the regeneration of the market town, but we're working within the context of what's economically viable. And as Councillor Sanderson's flagged here before us, I think the proposal is clear-cut, sad as that might be, around the lack of evidence of viability of existing use. So, notwithstanding decisions that will be made in other places and in other parts of the council work that's ongoing to support the ongoing vitality of the local area, I don't see we have a choice but to vote with the proposal on the table, which is what I'll be doing this evening.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that wishes to say anything? So we will move on to the vote, and we've had a recommendation of approval from Councillor Sanderson, which has been seconded by Councillor Goulston. All those in favour of approval, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Anyone against?
No.
Any abstentions? Therefore, that has been approved. We will move on to our next vote, which would be for listed building consent. I'm assuming Councillor Sanderson, are you happy to propose?
I am, Chair, yeah. Those approval,
And
that is.
Councillor Goulson as seconding.
I am.
Thank you. Therefore, all those in approval of to approve listed building consent, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. So that has been approved. We will move on to our next item, which is item 5, which is sorry, we had to do 2 votes on a particular application. We will move on to item 5, which is appeal decisions. And our planning service manager will report that to us.
Through you, Chair, just like to, I won't keep members much longer, but just to make members aware of the fact there's a number of decisions there, 4 decisions. They were all delegated refusals. They've all been actually dismissed on appeal. So it's 4 from 4 for that one.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank those who have contributed to the discussion this evening and for the hard work that the planning officers have put into writing the reports and presenting to us this evening. With that, I will end the meeting.